Capgras Delusion, you walk into your home. Everything looks normal. The same carpet. The same kitchen table. Your dog's bed in the corner like always. Then you see your brother sitting on the couch. He says, "Hey," smiles, nods, like it's just another Tuesday, but something inside you locks up. You're looking at him, but nothing feels right. His voice is the same. His face, same. Every little detail is spot on. And yet this cold, creeping certainty sinks in. That is not your brother. That's Capgras Delusion. One of the most bizarre, emotionally disturbing illusions the brain can create. It's not about seeing monsters or hearing voices. It's more subtle, more surgical. It's your brain splitting reality in two, logic and emotion. And when they stop talking to each other, things get seriously weird. Here's what happens. The part of your brain that recognizes faces is still working fine. That's the fusiform gyrus. It looks at the person and says, "Yep, that's mom," or "Yep, that's your wife." No problem there. But the part that handles the emotional response, that part goes silent. It's like a power outage in your emotional wiring. You're seeing someone you love, but you feel nothing. Zero familiarity. No warmth. No connection. So your brain goes, "Wait a minute. If this looks like mom, but doesn't feel like mom, maybe that's not really her." And it latches onto a totally wild, but emotionally satisfying explanation. That's an imposter, not someone who looks like her, not a stranger. An actual replacement, a fake, wearing her skin, acting like her, trying to deceive you. That's what makes Capgras Delusion so disturbing. It's not a break from logic. It's logic trying to explain a feeling that went missing. It usually shows up in people with schizophrenia, dementia, or after brain injuries. The cause: a disconnect between the fusiform gyrus and the amygdala, the recognition and the emotion centers. It's not that the person becomes stupid or delusional in the cartoon sense. Their senses are intact. Their memory is intact. But the emotional current gets cut, and that one missing piece causes the whole system to rewrite reality. There's a famous case of a man who had this delusion after a head injury. He saw his parents and became convinced they'd been replaced by perfect doubles. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicking. He just calmly explained that someone had swapped them out, and they were now actors pretending to be his family. But when they called him on the phone, he was totally fine. The voice felt familiar. The emotional connection was there, in person. Imposters. It's hard to wrap your head around, until you realize your own brain does a softer version of this all the time. Ever looked at someone you love and, for a brief second, they felt like a stranger, or looked in the mirror and didn't feel like yourself? It passes in a flash, and you shrug it off. But in those moments, you're getting a taste of what happens when recognition and emotion briefly fall out of sync. Capgras is just the extreme version, and it forces us to rethink what we think we know about reality, because we tend to assume we believe things because they're logical. But the truth is, we believe things because they feel true. When the feeling disappears, the belief falls apart, even if the facts stay the same. That's why Capgras patients cling so hard to the delusion. They're not trying to be dramatic. They're not even scared, a lot of the time. They're just trying to make sense of a world that no longer feels right. And in that moment, the delusion feels more believable than the actual truth. Think about that. The real person is standing in front of you. Their memories, their voice, their habits. But if your brain doesn't light up with that emotional signal, you can't trust them, and it doesn't stop at people. There have been rare cases where people thought their pets were replaced, or their homes, or even their own reflections. It's not about logic breaking. It's about emotional tagging going offline and the brain scrambling to explain the gap. That emotional tagging system is what gives our lives consistency. It's why your bedroom feels like your bedroom, why your mom's hug feels different from a stranger's, why your dog's bark triggers comfort instead of alarm. Take that away, and your reality starts to slide. And it's not always obvious. Capgras doesn't walk in with a red flag. It creeps in quietly. The person still functions. They can still go to work, make dinner, pay bills. But underneath, their sense of connection is fractured. They're trapped in a world of replicas. And that isolation, that feeling that the people you love have been swapped out like props in a play, that's a different kind of hell. And yet the logic behind it, weirdly, makes a kind of sense. If someone looked like your mom, acted like your mom, but didn't feel like her, how long would it take before you started to doubt? It's easy to say you'd never fall for it, but your sense of reality isn't as solid as it feels. It's stitched together by thousands of tiny emotional signals you're not even aware of. You lose just a few of those, and the whole picture shifts. That's what makes Capgras more than just a strange condition. It's a reminder of how fragile our version of reality really is. Cotard's delusion. You open your eyes, but nothing clicks. The light is there. The room is there. Your body moves, but it doesn't feel like it belongs to you. You touch your face. You look around. Everything is quiet. Not in a peaceful way. In a way that makes your skin feel hollow. Something feels missing, and that something is you. That is the beginning of Cotard's delusion, a condition so strange that it doesn't just mess with what you think about the world. It convinces you that you no longer exist. People with Cotards don't feel numb or lost. They genuinely believe they are dead, as in physically, emotionally, and spiritually gone. Some think they've lost their organs. Some say their blood has dried up. Some stop eating because what's the point of feeding a body that no longer functions? It doesn't come with screaming or terror. It's not dramatic, it's quiet, calm, cold. People say it like it's just a fact. I'm dead. My body is rotting. I shouldn't be here. Some even ask to be buried. Not because they're suicidal, but because they believe they already died and someone just forgot to clean it up. And this is not something they're talked into. It's not based on visions or voices or dreams. It comes from inside, from the total collapse of the feeling that says I am here, and I am real. The brain has systems to make you feel like you exist. Most people never notice them because they're always running in the background. Body awareness, emotional connection, a sense of location. Cotards is what happens when those systems go offline and the brain tries to explain what's left. And what's left is an eerie nothing. So the brain grabs the only idea that fits death. Some of the first people diagnosed with this delusion came into hospitals calm as could be. One man said he had no heart and no stomach. Another said his brain was missing. One woman said she was in hell because she had died and her punishment was walking the earth, even though she shouldn't be here. And none of them were joking. These were people who could talk, answer questions, hold a conversation. They just happened to believe they were corpses. It's connected to major depression in a lot of cases. Also to psychotic disorders. Sometimes it comes after a brain injury or trauma. Neurologically, it seems to involve damage in the parietal lobe, which tracks physical awareness, and in the frontal cortex, where we handle emotion and belief. Basically, the parts of the brain that keep track of your body and your identity start giving off static instead of signal. And when that internal mirror goes blank, the mind fills in the missing meaning. One case from the UK still sticks with researchers. A man stopped believing he existed. He said his blood had dried up and his brain no longer worked. He would sit quietly and just wait. Not in panic, not in sadness, just in this cold certainty that life had ended and he was left behind. They scanned his brain and found it was operating closer to a comatose state than a conscious one. His metabolism had slowed, his responses dulled. Even his perception of pain was reduced. His brain was mimicking death while his body kept walking. It's hard to imagine because most of us are used to feeling like we exist. You breathe, and it feels like something. You move your hand, that it's your hand. That feeling is so automatic we forget it's even there. Cotard removes it. It doesn't just numb your emotions. It strips away your very presence. It makes your own reflection look like a stranger. It turns your voice into a sound with no owner. And if that lasted long enough, your mind would start looking for a reason. Death is the only one that makes sense when nothing else fits. There's something even darker about the way Cotard quietly erases meaning. People with this delusion often stop caring about survival. They don't fight. They don't run. They just exist in a slow-moving horror where the world keeps going but they feel like a ghost. Some withdraw completely. Others wander. One woman believed she had died from septicemia. She stopped bathing, stopped eating, not out of protest, but because she believed her body was already decaying and no longer needed anything. Recovery is possible. In some cases, antipsychotics help. In others, electroconvulsive therapy can reconnect the emotional and physical systems that broke down. What's interesting is how often the recovery feels like waking up from a deep, frozen sleep. People say they come back into themselves slowly, like thawing. They look around and suddenly the world feels alive again. Their body feels like it belongs to them again. That feeling of being anchored to reality returns. But during the delusion, logic doesn't help. You can show them a heartbeat. Show them test results. They'll nod and still tell you they're dead. Because the belief isn't based on data. It's based on emotional reality. And when emotional reality collapses, facts lose their weight. Cotard's is more than just a strange glitch. It's a look at how fragile the self really is. Take away just a few signals. Touch, hunger, emotion, ownership, and even the most basic truth about being alive can fall apart. And the scariest part is, if your brain decided to convince you that you were already gone, you wouldn't argue. You'd believe it. Out of body experience, you're lying in bed. Your eyes are closed, you're still. But then you feel this strange pull like gravity lets go for a second. And suddenly, you're hovering. Not dreaming, not imagining. You can see your body still lying there. Same hair, same clothes, same shape under the blanket. But you are not in it. You are watching it from the outside. That is an out-of-body experience. And for the person going through it, it doesn't feel like a hallucination. It feels real. Real in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. People describe floating above their hospital beds, looking down during surgery, watching paramedics work on them from somewhere near the ceiling. Some say they saw family members crying in the hallway. Others claim they drifted out of the room entirely. And in the moment, none of it feels like a dream. It feels like awareness has been ripped from the body and placed somewhere else. Some people find it beautiful, peaceful. Others feel terrified, like they've come unglued from the world. And what makes this even stranger is that out-of-body experiences are not limited to one type of person. They happen to soldiers during combat, to patients under anesthesia, to people meditating, to people in car accidents. Sometimes it's tied to trauma, sometimes to spiritual practice, sometimes to nothing at all. 1 second you're grounded in your body, and the next, you're looking at it like an object in a room. There's a neurological explanation behind it, and it is strange in all the right ways. The brain has a region called the temporoparietal junction. It's where visual perception, balance, touch, and body awareness all come together. That spot builds your sense of where you are in space. And when it glitches, the self-location signal can get distorted. You might still technically be in your body, but your mind no longer believes it. The system that says this is me, here I am, flips. And just like that, you're outside yourself. Scientists have actually triggered this in the lab. In one study, researchers used virtual reality combined with electrical stimulation of the brain to make participants feel like they had left their body. They reported hovering behind themselves, watching their own back. Not a dream. Not pretend. The brain had reassigned their perspective and convinced them they were no longer inside their own skin. There's also something called the rubber hand illusion. You sit with your real hand hidden and a fake rubber hand in view. If someone strokes both hands at the same time, your brain starts to think the rubber hand is yours. It's a simple trick, but it proves a huge point. Your sense of body ownership is flexible. It can be hacked. Your mind can be convinced that something external is actually you. Now stretch that concept across your entire body. If your brain can confuse one hand, what happens if it confuses your whole physical presence? The out-of-body experience might not be you leaving your body. It might be your brain placing your self-image in the wrong location, like dragging a cursor across the screen and watching your sense of identity follow it. Still, that explanation doesn't make the experience feel any less intense. People who go through it often say it changed how they think about consciousness. Some believe it proves the soul exists. Others think it confirms that awareness can exist separately from the body. And it's easy to see why. When you feel like you've left the physical world behind, and yet you are still thinking, still observing, still existing, it shakes your assumptions about what life actually is. There are even reports of people having OBEs during cardiac arrest. Their brains had flatlined, no pulse, clinically dead, and yet they recall watching doctors trying to revive them. Some could describe the tools used, the order of events, things they should not have been able to see or hear. The debate about whether those memories were formed during the event or reconstructed later is still ongoing. But the fact that people report these with such clarity makes you stop and think. It also raises questions about what consciousness really is. If your sense of self can exist in a place your body is not, what does that mean for the boundaries of perception? Are we just a collection of signals wired to a physical shell? Or is there something else going on that science hasn't fully mapped yet? Out-of-body experiences sit at the edge of what we understand about the brain. They are not always spiritual. They are not always psychological. Sometimes they are both. Sometimes neither. What's clear is that the brain is capable of creating a version of reality where your physical body is not the center of your awareness. And in those moments, you stop being a body with a mind and start being a mind with a point of view. It is one of the few phenomena where the border between science and mystery feels thin, because even when you know the neuroscience behind it, it still messes with your sense of what is real. You are looking at yourself, and you are not in there. And no matter how rational you are, that changes something. Ego dissolution. You're not high. You're not asleep. But suddenly, there's no you. Not in a scary way. Not like you've disappeared. More like you were never a separate thing to begin with. The edges blur. The voice in your head fades. You're still aware. Still conscious. But the sense of being a self, an individual, a separate identity, it's just gone. That's ego dissolution. The breakdown of the mental boundary that says I am me and everything else is not. And when it happens, it's not subtle. The whole structure that you think of as your personality, your story, your name, your history, all of it gets pulled out from under you. Not erased, but made irrelevant. You're not watching it happen. You're not reacting to it. You're just there. And you don't even feel like a someone who is there. You just are. It's one of the most disorienting things a mind can go through. People describe it like becoming part of everything, like their thoughts are no longer their own, but part of a larger current. Some say they felt like they became the room they were sitting in. Others say they melted into light, into sound, into the air itself. It sounds dramatic. It sounds poetic. But to the person experiencing it, it's more raw than words can capture. Ego dissolution isn't a random hallucination. It has a deep neurological footprint. Most of what you call yourself, your internal monologue, your preferences, your goals, is managed by something in the brain called the default mode network. It's active when you're thinking about yourself, your past, your future. It's the home base of the ego. And during ego dissolution, that network goes quiet. Not damaged, just turned down. The usual noise of identity, your memories, your status, your needs, goes silent. And the silence feels infinite. This can happen in a lot of different contexts. Psychedelics like psilocybin or DMT are the most studied triggers. But it also shows up in deep meditation, in sensory deprivation, even in moments of extreme trauma or awe. It's not always pleasant. For some people, it's terrifying. Because when the ego drops, there's no one left to hold the panic. The self is the thing that keeps us feeling stable. And when it dissolves, you're left with raw experience and no story to hold on to. But for others, it's the most freeing thing they've ever felt. No fear, no guilt, no shame, no striving. Just a kind of stillness that feels endless. That's why so many people come out of ego dissolution states, saying things like I understood everything, or I felt connected to the universe, or there was no me, and it was beautiful. They're not being vague on purpose. They're trying to describe something that doesn't fit inside language. And here's the twist. The experience itself isn't mystical, but it feels more real than anything else they've ever known. That's what makes it so powerful. Even when you explain it neurologically, even when you can see the scans showing the default mode network shutting down, the actual lived moment of ego death hits with a clarity that logic can't touch. You don't forget it. You don't brush it off. It leaves a mark. Some researchers think ego dissolution could be the key to why psychedelics are so effective in treating depression, anxiety, and addiction. When the ego is dissolved, you're not just seeing your life differently. You are not locked in the same identity that carried all the pain and the patterns. You get distance from your own story, and from that distance things shift. That grip of needing to be someone, needing to win, needing to fix, needing to prove, it relaxes. And sometimes when the ego comes back online, it's not holding on so tightly anymore. It doesn't mean you forget who you are. It means that for a moment, you realize you don't have to be ruled by who you think you are. The difference is subtle but massive. Most of us walk around convinced that we are the voice in our head, that the thoughts and fears running through our brain define us. Ego dissolution shatters that illusion. It shows you that you are not the voice. You are the space the voice is happening in. And when that hits you, it changes the way you live. You argue less. You fear less. You need less control. Because once you've experienced yourself without the story of self, you stop needing that story to be perfect. You stop needing to win at being a person. You just return to experience, to presence, to now. Not everyone wants that. Some people fight it. Because the ego, for all its flaws, gives us a sense of meaning and safety. It organizes the chaos. It gives us a face to wear. But sometimes letting it fall apart, even for a moment, is exactly what we need. Not to disappear, but to remember that there's something deeper underneath the performance of being somebody. Ego dissolution isn't about becoming nothing. It's about realizing you were never just one thing in the first place. Auditory Shepard tone. You hear a tone, it's rising, slowly, smoothly. It just keeps climbing. Higher and higher and higher. But here's the weird part. It never actually gets there. It never stops. It never peaks. It just keeps going. Over and over again. And it drives your brain a little bit crazy. That is the Shepard tone. An illusion made of sound. Nothing visual. No trick of the eye. Just pure audio. But it does something strange. It makes your brain feel like you are always going up, even though you're really standing still. It's like walking up a staircase that wraps into a circle. You never reach the top because the top does not exist. Here's how it works. The Shepard tone is built from multiple sine waves layered together. Think of it like having one tone rising in pitch, another starting low and getting louder, and another fading out as it climbs. As soon as one tone fades out, another fades in. Your ears blend them together and your brain interprets the whole thing as a single, never-ending rise. But in reality, the pitch is looping in a cycle, over and over. No actual progression, just the illusion of one. It sounds like a paradox. But your brain does not care about facts. It cares about patterns, and this pattern tells it something is always increasing. So it believes it. You feel like you are climbing. You feel like you are on the edge of something. But you are just spinning in place. This illusion messes with more than just curiosity. It can build pressure, tension, even anxiety. That is why filmmakers use it in movies to build unease. You have heard it without knowing. In war scenes, in chase sequences, in dream sequences. Christopher Nolan used it in Dunkirk to create a rising sense of panic that never resolves. It was subtle, but it made your chest tighten. That constant rising tone made it feel like time was running out even when nothing was happening on screen. Game designers use it too. Some video games play a Shepard tone in the background while you ascend a tower or dive into deep space. The result is a creeping sense of endless motion. Like you are always almost there but never quite arriving. Your brain leans forward. Your body braces. But the destination never comes. There's something deeply psychological about how we respond to this illusion. Humans are wired to search for resolution. We like arcs. We like patterns that finish. A song that ends. a chord that resolves. The Shepard tone denies all of that. It stretches the moment of anticipation into something endless. And in doing that, it exposes just how uncomfortable we are with loops that do not close. It also messes with our perception of time. When your brain is tracking constant motion upward, it creates the feeling that time is accelerating. You feel like things are escalating even if nothing else is changing. That pressure you feel in your chest or the urge to act is not tied to anything real. It is just your brain reacting to the illusion of progress. What is wild is how powerless you are to stop it. Even when you know what is happening, even when you understand the mechanism, your brain still falls for it. It cannot help itself. You hear that climb and something inside you starts preparing for impact. But impact never comes. That rising pressure with no release triggers stress, and when you experience it long enough, it creates a kind of mental fatigue, like your nervous system is holding its breath. It is also used in music. Some electronic artists layer Shepard tones into their tracks to build momentum. You hear the track rising. You think a drop is coming, but it keeps going. The tension gets stretched out, and when the beat finally does drop, it hits even harder because your brain has been waiting so long. It is a psychological setup, and it works. The Shepard tone proves something kind of uncomfortable. Your sense of movement, of rising or falling, of being closer or further away, it is not real. It is not based on facts. It is a construction. And if someone knows how to manipulate that construction, they can make you feel like you are ascending forever while standing still. That is more than an audio trick. That is a mirror of how we experience goals, pressure, ambition. Always chasing the next step, always almost there, and never arriving. You hear the tone rise and think you are making progress, but you are running in place. And somehow, even once you understand it, you still keep running. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. You go to reach for your phone. Same phone you always use. But now, it looks the size of a brick, way too big for your hand. Or maybe your hand suddenly looks tiny. You move your fingers and it feels like they're miles long. You walk down the hallway and the door at the end seems impossibly far away. Then, a second later, it feels like it's rushing toward you. You blink and everything snaps back to normal. But those few seconds, they mess with you. That is Alice in Wonderland syndrome, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Your brain warps your sense of size, distance, and even time. Objects shrink, expand, stretch. Your own body can feel distorted. Your perception of space folds in on itself, and you know it is not real. That is the strange part. You know that your hand is not 10 feet long. You know that your room has not suddenly doubled in size. But your brain tells you otherwise, and in the moment it feels real. This is not a metaphor. It is not a drug trip. It is a real neurological condition. And it mostly happens in the brain's occipital lobe, the part that handles visual information, and the parietal lobe, which helps you understand spatial relationships. When those areas misfire, your mental map of the world breaks. What you see and what you know no longer match. It is called Alice in Wonderland syndrome because the symptoms are almost identical to what Alice experiences in the book. Shrinking, growing, losing track of proportions. And just like in the story, the people who experience it feel lost inside something that should feel familiar. Your house, your body, your surroundings. All of it suddenly feels strange, as if you are looking at the world through the wrong end of a telescope. For some, it lasts only a few minutes. For others, it can go on for hours. It can come in waves. And while it is not dangerous, it is incredibly unsettling. Imagine trying to have a conversation while someone's face is pulsing in and out of focus. Imagine walking through a familiar room that suddenly feels stretched like elastic. You reach for a doorknob and your hand feels too far away to get there. You know where you are, but it does not feel like it. This syndrome is often linked to migraines. In fact, a lot of people who have it also suffer from intense migraine auras. But it has also been seen in epilepsy, infections, even in extreme fatigue or stress. Children are more likely to experience it than adults, which makes sense when you realize how quickly their brains are developing and recalibrating. But when adults do go through it, it can make them feel like they're losing their grip on reality. There are also cases where it is triggered by certain medications or fevers. In those moments, the brain is under pressure, and sometimes that pressure causes it to scramble the normal rules of perception. You are not seeing hallucinations. You are seeing real things in distorted ways. That is an important difference. It is not that things appear out of nowhere. It is that the real world becomes warped and stretched and bent in ways your logical mind knows are wrong. But your senses refuse to correct, and it is not just sight. Some people with this syndrome say time feels warped. Minutes feel like hours, or they feel detached from their own thoughts. They hear sounds that seem far away 1 second and painfully close the next. Your brain is trying to anchor you to a world that keeps shifting under your feet, and no amount of logic can pull you out while it is happening. The emotional impact of this syndrome is heavy. You start to question everything. You do not trust what you see. You second guess your own senses. You could be sitting in a quiet room and suddenly feel like the floor is stretching out in front of you, or that the ceiling is collapsing inward. And then, as quickly as it came, it is gone. Just like that, you feel normal again, but the memory of it sticks. There is no guaranteed treatment. Usually, doctors focus on the underlying condition, the migraine, the epilepsy, the infection. In most cases, Alice in Wonderland syndrome is temporary, but that does not make it easier to go through. The experience feels surreal in the moment and impossible to explain afterward. People struggle to describe it to others. They say it feels like being in a dream while wide awake, or like watching the world glitch. And maybe the most disorienting part is this. Your sense of self is built on stability. Your body, your space, your perception of the world. When those things shift, even slightly, it creates a fracture, a feeling that you are not where you think you are, that your body is not what you think it is, that reality is slipping just a little, and when your mind cannot trust the ground it stands on, even simple moments start to feel like falling. Autoscopic hallucination. You walk into a room, and someone is already standing there. Same clothes, same posture, same everything. And for a second, you think maybe it's a reflection. Maybe there's a mirror you didn't notice. But then the figure turns toward you, and it's you. Not like seeing yourself in a dream. Not like a memory. You are awake, fully conscious, and there is a duplicate of your own body standing right in front of you. That's an autoscopic hallucination. A rare and deeply unsettling experience where you literally see yourself from the outside. It is not like looking in a mirror. It is not out of body. You are still inside your own body. You are still moving and breathing and thinking, but somewhere near you, across the room or just beside you, there is a second version of you, visual, real, solid looking, and your brain fully believes it's there. This isn't some vague shadow or passing trick of the light. People describe it as a perfect double. They can see the details in the hair, the folds of clothing, even facial expressions, and it's not always still. Sometimes the double mirrors their movements. Sometimes it stares back with no emotion, and sometimes it moves on its own, like it's alive. That's when it goes from strange to terrifying. Autoscopic comes from the Greek words for self and looking. And that's exactly what's happening. You're looking at yourself, but in a way that completely shatters how your brain understands personal identity. Because when you see yourself in a photo or a video, your mind knows there's a delay. It knows it's a recording. But in an autoscopic hallucination, there's no delay. It's real time. And your brain cannot reconcile how you are both the observer and the observed. This kind of hallucination tends to show up in people with certain neurological conditions. Temporal lobe epilepsy is a big one. Some people with brain lesions or migraines have reported it too, and it's been seen in extreme exhaustion, high fevers, or even moments of psychological crisis. It's like the brain's perception of the body glitches, and suddenly the internal sense of self gets projected outward. The mechanism behind it is complex, but one key area is the temporoparietal junction. That part of the brain helps you track your own body in space. It stitches together signals from your vision, touch, movement. Everything that tells you this is where I am. When that junction misfires, it can confuse your sense of where your body actually is. And sometimes it externalizes that confusion. It creates a double, not in your imagination, right in your visual field. People who experience this often feel a deep sense of wrongness. Not just fear, but a kind of existential unease. Because when you see yourself as if you are a separate person, your sense of self collapses. You are no longer contained. You are watching yourself from outside while still being inside. That contradiction hits hard. It makes you question which version of you is the real one. Are you the one moving or the one being seen? Sometimes it lasts only a few seconds. Other times it stretches into minutes, and in some cases it happens repeatedly. A recurring glitch in perception. And after it ends, there's often a strange silence, like your brain is trying to put the world back together, but something in you knows it will never feel quite the same. Some people have tried to interpret these hallucinations in spiritual or supernatural ways. Seeing a doppelganger has long been associated with omens, death, or warnings in folklore. And it makes sense. When you witness yourself standing outside yourself, it feels like something sacred or forbidden is being exposed. Something you were not supposed to see. It's a moment that feels bigger than you, even if it's just your brain firing the wrong way. But the science does not need myth to make it fascinating, because this illusion reveals something fundamental about how fragile our sense of identity really is. You think you are a fixed point, one person, in one body, but the moment your brain throws that signal off, you realize just how much of that identity is built from internal guesswork. The body you trust so much can turn into a stranger in an instant, and not because you lost your mind, but because your brain is still functioning, just processing in the wrong sequence. It doesn't mean you are broken. It means that the self is not as stable as we think, that you are not a single, solid thing. You are a process, a constant construction, and sometimes that construction shows you the blueprint instead of the finished model. You see yourself the way the brain sees you, from the outside in and the inside out, all at once. When that illusion hits, It leaves you with more questions than answers. Because how do you go back to normal when you've seen yourself standing in the same room as you? Blindsight. You're told you're blind, and you believe it because everything in front of you is pitch black. No color, no shapes, no movement, just nothing. The doctor asks you to reach for a cup on the table. You laugh it off, but then your hand reaches out anyway and lands right on it. You didn't see the cup. You didn't guess. But somehow, you still grabbed it. That's blindsight. It's one of the strangest neurological phenomena ever recorded. You are clinically blind. Your visual cortex, the part of your brain that processes sight, is damaged. But somehow, you can still react to things you cannot see. You can point to where a light flashed. You can dodge an object thrown at you. You can walk down a hallway without bumping into anything, all while being totally unaware that you are doing any of it. This isn't fake blindness. It's not psychological. The people who experience blindsight have real, medically verified damage to their primary visual cortex. That's the area at the back of the brain that normally handles everything you see. But here's the twist. Vision is not limited to that one area. The brain has backup systems, and those systems can still receive and respond to visual input, even if you're not consciously aware of it. In most blindsight cases, the damage is in the occipital lobe, specifically in an area called V1. When V1 goes offline, the conscious experience of sight disappears. It's like the screen in your head shuts off, but the eyes still work. The optic nerves still carry signals, and those signals can still reach other parts of the brain, especially in areas like the superior colliculus, which is involved in motion detection and spatial awareness. So even if the main visual center is down, some information still gets through. The person doesn't see the ball flying at their head, but they flinch. They don't see the arrow on the screen, but they can guess its direction. And they guess right more often than chance. It feels like intuition, but it's not. It's real sensory input, just processed without awareness. This totally shatters the way most people think about perception. We assume that if we're not aware of something, we can't respond to it. But blindsight proves the opposite. You can be completely unaware of a stimulus and still react to it. Not out of luck, not out of habit, out of actual unconscious processing. Researchers tested this with people who had blindsight by showing them flashing lights, arrows, even faces, and asking them to guess what they were. The subjects would say they couldn't see anything, that it was all black. But their guesses kept being right, over and over again. Not just once or twice, not 50%. Some of them got it right 80 or 90% of the time, without ever realizing they were seeing anything at all. And that leads to something even weirder. What does it mean to see? If your brain can detect, process, and act on visual information without your conscious awareness, then awareness isn't required for perception. You can have vision without the experience of vision. That's the split. There's seeing with awareness, what we call normal sight, and then there's seeing without knowing. That second kind is what blindsight is made of. It also raises huge questions about consciousness. Most people think of consciousness as the thing that makes us human, the control room, the part of us that knows what's going on. But blindsight suggests that consciousness might just be a latecomer, a narrator who takes credit for decisions made behind the scenes. Your brain is doing the work. Consciousness is just the voice explaining it after the fact. Blindsight also exposes how much of what we call experience is really just interpretation. These people don't feel like they're seeing anything. They don't see shadows or outlines. They don't even sense movement. But their brain is still translating the world into action. That means your sense of what's real is not based on truth. It's based on what you're aware of. And awareness is only a fraction of what your brain is doing. Imagine walking through life and your eyes are open, but your mind is dark. Yet somehow, you're still catching things, still moving around obstacles, still reacting. You don't feel like you're seeing, but your body behaves like you are. That split is more than strange. It's deeply unsettling. It shows that your conscious self is not in full control. It never was. And this doesn't just apply to sight. There are versions of this in other senses. People who can't consciously feel touch, but still flinch when poked. People who say they can't hear, but turn their heads toward sudden sounds. All of this points to a brain that is far more layered than we're comfortable admitting. The part of you that speaks, thinks, and reflects is just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath it is a massive, silent machine, always processing, always reacting, even when you have no clue it's happening. Blindsight is the clearest example of that machine in action. It's proof that awareness is not required to interact with the world. You don't need to see. You just need a brain that knows how to respond, even when you don't. Hollow mask illusion. You're staring at a mask. At first glance, it's just a normal face, a plastic, blank expression. But then it turns, slowly. You realize something's off. The mask isn't bulging outward like a real face. It's caved in, hollow, like looking at the inside of a Halloween decoration. And yet, your brain keeps insisting it's popping outward. It keeps showing you a normal face. You know it's wrong, but you can't stop seeing it that way. That's the hollow mask illusion. And it messes with your head for one reason. Your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are actually telling it. You are literally staring at the inside of a mask, but your brain flips it around. It projects a face where there is none. It fills in the shape. It corrects what it thinks must be a mistake. It doesn't care that the shadows are backwards, that the angles make no sense, or that nothing about it fits the laws of depth. The brain just overrides all that and forces the illusion on you. This happens because human brains are wired to recognize faces, not just casually, but obsessively. The moment you were born, your brain started learning what a face looks like, how far apart the eyes are, the way cheeks curve outward, the symmetry of a nose, and it locks that template in. Anytime you see something that even remotely resembles a face, your brain tries to match it, even when the actual object is completely wrong. So when you look at a hollow mask and it starts to rotate, your visual system panics a little. It's getting conflicting information. The geometry says it's caving in, but the face template says it should be sticking out. And your brain doesn't like conflict, so it settles it by choosing the version that makes more sense, even if it's totally false. That's why the mask appears to bulge outward. It's not your eyes lying to you. It's your brain rewriting reality to avoid confusion. And it doesn't just look wrong, it behaves wrong. As the hollow side of the mask turns, it looks like the face is following you, like the eyes are locked on you, like the whole head is rotating in a strange, ghostly way that no real person could ever do. This isn't because the object is moving in a creepy way. It's because your brain is misinterpreting the rotation. It thinks it's a regular 3D face, so when the angles change, the brain compensates with a weird motion. You're watching a glitch in your own perception. Now here's the part that gets even weirder. If you show this illusion to someone with schizophrenia, they often don't fall for it. Their brain processes the mask more accurately. They see the hollow shape for what it really is. Caved in, not bulging out. No illusion, just raw, literal perception. That doesn't mean they're better at seeing. It means their brain might not apply the same kind of top-down correction that most of us rely on. They're not imposing expectations onto the world in the same automatic way. That difference has fascinated scientists for years, because it shows how much of our so-called normal perception depends on assumptions. We don't see the world directly. We see the version our brain thinks is most likely. And most of the time, that helps us survive. It makes things faster, simpler, easier to navigate. But illusions like the hollow mask reveal what we're sacrificing for that efficiency. We're not always seeing what's actually there. And the more familiar the object, the stronger the illusion. If you use a hollow mask of a random shape or a cartoonish face, the effect is weaker. But if it's a human face, especially one that looks real and neutral, the illusion locks in tight. Your brain won't let it go. It's almost impossible to unsee. Even when someone explains it to you, even when you try to override it, your brain just keeps snapping back to the false version. That tells you something important about how fragile truth is, not in the abstract sense. In the literal, moment to moment, how you navigate the world sense. You might believe that seeing is believing, that if you can see something with your own eyes, it must be true. But the hollow mask laughs at that idea, because you are seeing something that is physically impossible, and your brain insists on it anyway. This illusion isn't a trick of light. It's not magic. It's not sleight of hand. It's your brain doing exactly what it's supposed to do, filling in gaps, making assumptions, smoothing out the world into something it understands. But in doing that, it shows its weakness. It shows how deeply we rely on pattern recognition over truth. You're not seeing a face. You're seeing your brain's version of what a face should be. So every time you look at a hollow mask and watch it twist in that impossible, inside, out way, you're not just seeing an optical illusion. You're seeing your own mind refusing to believe reality. False awakening, you wake up in your bed. Maybe the light looks a little weird, or your phone screen is blurry, or the hallway outside your room feels slightly off. But nothing screams dream. You just assume you're awake, because that's how waking up feels. You stretch, get up, maybe go through your morning routine. Then suddenly, something snaps. You wake up again, in the same bed, this time for real. Or at least, you think it's real. That's a false awakening, and it messes with your sense of reality in a way that few illusions can, because it doesn't happen while you're watching a screen or reacting to a stimulus. It happens inside your mind, in a dream so vivid and convincing that it perfectly mimics waking life. You don't know you're dreaming. You think you already woke up. Your brain plays out a scene that feels completely normal, and you don't question it until something breaks the pattern. False awakenings often begin with a real intention. You want to wake up. Maybe the dream you're in is uncomfortable or just boring, so your brain gives you what feels like an escape, a perfect replica of waking life. The bed, the room, the noises, the light coming through the window, even small things like the texture of your blanket or the clock on your wall. It all shows up with eerie accuracy, but none of it is real. And the most disturbing part is how easily you buy into it. You feel your body move. You might brush your teeth, talk to someone, eat breakfast, and you don't realize you're dreaming. Not because you're slow or unaware, but because the brain is unbelievably good at simulating reality when it wants to. When you're dreaming, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic and self-awareness, powers down, so you don't question the world around you. You just go with it. Sometimes, one false awakening turns into several. You wake up in a dream, realize something's off, and then try to wake up again, only to find you're still dreaming. This can loop over and over. Each layer feels more real than the last. And the deeper it goes, the harder it is to tell what's real and what's not. People who experience this describe a rising panic, a sense that they're trapped in a loop, that reality has slipped out of reach. In more extreme cases, the dream version of waking up isn't neutral. It's eerie. The room feels too quiet. Objects look distorted. Your own reflection doesn't behave normally. These versions start to take on a nightmare quality, even if nothing scary happens outright. There's just a sense of wrongness, like your brain is trying to recreate the real world from memory, but keeps getting tiny details wrong. And those wrong details build up until it feels like you're walking through a fake version of your life. What's fascinating is that the brain doesn't need the outside world to feel grounded. It can simulate the entire experience of waking up using only internal signals. You can feel the weight of your own body, the coolness of the air, the sound of a fan, all imagined, all produced by the same mind that's trying to convince you this is reality. It proves how thin the line is between perception and fabrication. False awakenings also connect to lucid dreaming. Sometimes, people become lucid during a false awakening because they notice a contradiction. A clock with scrambled numbers. A light switch that doesn't work. A door that leads somewhere it shouldn't. These little slips are clues, and if you catch them, you can gain awareness. But most of the time you don't. You just accept the logic of the dream, because your brain is still operating under the illusion of control. What makes this even more disorienting is what happens after you truly wake up. For a moment, you don't trust your surroundings. You question whether you're actually awake now or if it's just another layer. You might sit still, waiting for something to glitch again. That doubt can stick with you for minutes, sometimes hours. It lingers like static in the background of your thoughts. Because if your mind could trick you that deeply once, it can do it again. This illusion goes beyond weird dream stuff. It hits something personal. It makes you realize that what you call reality is not as solid as you thought. You rely on routines, sensations, familiar details to convince yourself that you're awake. But all of that can be fabricated. If your brain wants to, it can create a full simulation of consciousness, down to the way your feet feel on the floor or how cold the tile is in the bathroom. It's not just what you see, it's how you feel about seeing it. And that's where the illusion locks you in. False awakenings show you that waking up doesn't mean what you think it means. You can wake up 5 times in a row and still be dreaming. You can look around, talk, move, and act like everything's normal, all inside a fabricated world. And when you finally do come back to the real one, part of you will always wonder if it's really the last layer. Pinocchio Illusion. You sit in a chair. Someone stands behind you, lightly touching your nose with one hand and your finger with their other hand. You're blindfolded, so you can't see anything. Then they start tapping. Your finger, your nose, your finger, your nose. Over and over in a perfect rhythm. After a minute or two, something really weird happens. You start to feel like your nose is growing longer. Not just an idea. A physical sensation. Like it's stretching out in front of your face. Like you're turning into Pinocchio. This is not a joke. This is a real phenomenon called the Pinocchio Illusion, and it's one of the weirdest ways your brain can lie to you about your own body. There's no visual trick. No psychedelic drug. Just gentle touches and your brain's own assumptions. That's all it takes to convince you that your body is changing shape. So, why does this happen? It comes down to how your brain puts together a sense of where your body is in space. You don't usually think about this, but every second, your brain is taking input from your muscles, joints, skin, and eyes to build a kind of internal map. It uses this map to figure out where your limbs are, how you're positioned, and what's happening to you. Most of the time, this map feels completely reliable. You raise your arm, and you feel it move. You touch your knee, and you know exactly where it is. But when those signals start to conflict, like in this illusion, your brain gets confused. You're blindfolded, so visual information is gone. Your finger feels like it's reaching out and tapping something. At the same time, your nose feels like it's being tapped, but the distance between those two sensations doesn't match your usual body map. If your finger is extended out in front of you and still reaching your nose, then something must have changed. The brain doesn't think, oh, I must be hallucinating. It thinks, well, I guess my nose got longer. It fills in the blanks with the most logical explanation, even if it's physically impossible. That's the scary part. Your brain doesn't always check for reality. It checks for consistency. And if the story makes sense within its own little system of logic, it rolls with it. The illusion of the growing nose is a perfect example. Nothing is actually moving. But your brain gets two streams of sensory data that don't line up. And instead of rejecting both, it invents a third story that makes them fit. This is part of a bigger system in your brain called proprioception. That's your sense of body position. It's not about sight or touch or hearing. It's its own internal GPS, constantly updating your body's layout without you even thinking about it. But that system is fragile. If you throw in just the right kind of noise, like repeated, mismatched taps, you can throw the whole map off. And when the map breaks, your sense of self breaks with it. Because your body is a huge part of how you understand reality. You trust the position of your hands, your face, your feet. You trust that your skin is where it's supposed to be, that your limbs are the same length they were yesterday. But this illusion shows that none of that is guaranteed. Your brain can warp your sense of your own body just by tweaking the inputs. What's even stranger is that this illusion isn't rare. Most people can feel it if the setup is done right. And when it kicks in, it feels extremely real. People don't say, I think my nose might be growing. They say it is. I feel it. They describe it in detail. How far it seems to stretch, how weirdly numb or detached it feels, how they instinctively lean back to keep balance, as if the extra length might tip them forward. It's a hallucination you feel, not just one you think. This doesn't just happen with noses either. There are versions of this illusion for arms and legs. Some experiments use rubber limbs, mirrors, or synchronized stroking to make people feel like they have an extra hand, or that their real hand is floating in the wrong place. It's all the same principle. When sensory signals disagree, the brain picks the most believable lie and builds a new version of your body on the fly. And that should make you think twice about how stable your self-image really is. If your brain can convince you that your nose is growing without any visual proof, what else can it make you believe? How much of your physical identity is based on habit, not fact? Your body feels familiar only because your brain tells you it is. The second that story changes, your whole reality starts to shift. So the next time you rub your nose or reach out to touch your face, remember that even that simple act, something you've done a million times, depends on a complex, fragile agreement between different parts of your brain. And when that agreement slips, even for a second, you can feel your own face melt into something alien. Phantom limb syndrome, you lose a limb. An arm, a leg, maybe even just a finger, it's gone. Surgically removed. Physically absent. But weeks later, maybe even years later, you still feel it. Not in the emotional sense. In a raw, physical way, you feel it itching. You feel it moving. Sometimes it burns, like it's on fire. Sometimes it cramps so hard you double over, even though there's nothing there. The limb is missing, but the sensation is real. That's phantom limb syndrome. And it's not rare. The vast majority of amputees report feeling some version of this. The invisible limb that won't let go. This doesn't happen because people are imagining things. It's not psychological in the dismissive sense. It's neurological. Your brain has a map of your entire body. It knows where your fingers are, how long your legs are, where your elbow bends. This map lives in your somatosensory cortex, a strip of your brain that processes touch and movement. But here's the thing. When you lose a limb, that map doesn't automatically update. The brain still thinks the missing part is there. It keeps trying to send signals. It keeps waiting for input. When it gets none, it doesn't shut down. It invents its own feedback instead. That's why the sensations feel so real. You're not just remembering what it felt like to have a hand. Your brain is actively simulating the experience. It's sending motor commands, expecting a response, and when there's nothing there, it loops. That loop can cause pain, intense, stabbing pain, or twisting, or pressure. Some people describe it like their missing hand is clenched into a fist they can't open. Others say it feels like their toes are curled so tight they might snap. But there's nothing to unclench, no toes to stretch. The body is gone, but the brain refuses to accept it. It gets stranger. In some cases, touching part of the face can trigger sensations in the phantom limb. Like if someone strokes your cheek, you feel it in your missing fingers. That sounds impossible until you understand how the brain's map is laid out. On the somatosensory cortex, the face is located right next to the hand. When the hand section goes quiet after an amputation, the face section can start creeping in, taking over that empty territory. So when you touch your cheek, the signal spills over into what used to be the hand's neighborhood. The brain misroutes the touch, and suddenly your non-existent fingers are tingling. This is not just a bizarre side effect. It's evidence that your body, as you experience it, is a construction, a constantly maintained simulation. And when that simulation breaks, you don't lose sensation. You lose accuracy. The system keeps firing, even without a body to back it up. One of the most fascinating parts of phantom limb syndrome is the way people have learned to treat it. There's a therapy called mirror box therapy. It's incredibly simple. You place your existing limb in front of a mirror and you hide the missing limb's stump behind it. When you move your real limb and watch its reflection, it looks like your phantom limb is moving. And somehow, that illusion, that visual feedback, is enough to convince the brain that the limb is still there and functioning. For many people, this reduces or even stops the pain. Think about what that means. Your brain, desperate for feedback, accepts a fake signal. It sees a reflected arm and goes, "That's good enough." The pain drops. The cramping stops. The clenched fist finally opens, even though it never existed in the first place. The mirror tricks the mind into rewriting the map. That's not just a therapy. That's a negotiation with your own brain. And it exposes something deeply unsettling. We all like to believe that our sense of our body is rooted in reality, that we feel what's there and nothing more. But phantom limb syndrome shows that the reverse is just as true. You can feel what's not there. Your brain can cling to something that no longer exists. Sensation becomes memory. Movement becomes a guess. And pain, maybe the most convincing sensation of all, becomes detached from any physical source. It becomes a story the brain keeps telling even after the evidence is gone. This isn't limited to limbs. There are documented cases of people feeling phantom sensations from missing ears, missing noses, even missing teeth. One person reported feeling their amputated foot still resting on the brake pedal of a car they no longer drove. The details are vivid, specific, persistent. These aren't vague impressions. They're full-body hallucinations that come from the inside out. And if the brain can hold on to a limb that's been physically removed, what else is it holding on to without your knowledge? What else are you feeling, not because it's real, but because your mind refuses to let it go? The body you experience is not the same as the body you have. It's filtered, projected, interpreted through layers of expectation and habit. Phantom limb syndrome doesn't just expose a glitch. It reveals how much of your reality depends on trust. Trust in your brain's version of your body. When that trust breaks, the body doesn't disappear. It haunts you. Bouba Kiki Effect. You're shown two shapes. One is jagged, spiky, almost like a splatter of glass. The other is soft and rounded, like a blob or a balloon. Then you're given two nonsense words, Bouba and Kiki. You're told to match them to the shapes. Almost everyone says the same thing. Bouba is the round one. Kiki is the spiky one. No one taught you this. You've never seen these shapes before. The words are made up. And yet the answer feels obvious, like it couldn't be anything else. That is the Bouba Kiki effect. And it's not just some weird guessing game. It's one of the strangest examples of how your brain maps sound onto meaning without you realizing it. The effect was first noticed in the 1920s, but it didn't become widely studied until decades later. Across languages, cultures, and age groups, people consistently make the same associations. Bouba is soft, Kiki is sharp. Even toddlers who barely speak get it right. Even people who can't read. It seems baked into how we experience the world. So what's happening here? Why do made-up words feel so specific? It starts with the way we process sound. Bouba is built from rounded, voiced consonants. The B and the long O make your lips come together in a slow, open shape. You have to use your vocal cords. It feels smooth, soft. Kiki, on the other hand, is sharp and unvoiced. The K hits hard in the back of your mouth. The I sound is high, pitched and tight. When you say Kiki, it's quick and punchy. No drawn-out vibration, just a quick burst. Even before you attach meaning, the physical act of saying the word gives it a kind of personality. Now add visual shape to the mix. Your brain is used to patterns. It likes when different kinds of information match. So when it sees a shape that's all curves and softness, it wants a sound that feels the same. Bouba fits. When it sees something jagged and angular, it expects a sound that's equally aggressive. Kiki fits. That's synesthesia, a kind of sensory cross-wiring. But even people who don't have true synesthesia experience this overlap. It's not full, blown mixing of senses. It's more like a subconscious agreement between them. And it runs deep. In one experiment, researchers gave participants unfamiliar names for aliens from different planets. Some names were made with soft, round sounds. Others were made with sharp, spiky ones. When asked to match the names to creatures, people almost always gave the soft names to round aliens and the sharp names to spiky ones. No context, no backstory, just pure sound and shape. And the results were consistent. You might think this only happens with nonsense words, but it actually bleeds into real language. Across the world, words for round things are more likely to use round vowels. Words for sharp or cutting things are more likely to use hard consonants. This isn't a rule. Language is messy. But the trend is there. Even the word balloon sounds soft. The word knife does not. So what does this say about your brain? It says that you're constantly pairing form with meaning, even when you don't know it. You're assigning emotion and texture to sounds. You're building a kind of code book for the world, a quiet system of associations that shapes how you interpret things. And this happens fast, instantly. You don't think about it. You don't rationalize it. It just feels right. It also helps explain why some brand names and logos feel more fitting than others. A soft drink might do better with a rounded name. A tech startup might pick something with a punchy sound. You feel like you trust the name. You think it sounds clean or strong or friendly, but what you're really responding to is the hidden shape of the sound. Even in art and music, the effect shows up. People tend to match deep, rounded tones with slow, smooth visuals. Sharp, high-pitched sounds with jagged visuals. Your brain wants harmony between the senses. And when that harmony happens, it feels satisfying. When it doesn't, it feels weird, even if you can't explain why. What makes the Bouba Kiki effect so powerful is how universal it seems to be. It's not tied to culture or education. It shows up in infants before they can speak. It shows up in people from isolated regions with no exposure to outside language. This suggests it's something hardwired, not learned. A natural reflex in how we connect sound and shape. That's what makes it an illusion. You think you're making a free choice, but your brain made it for you the moment you heard the word. It's one of those strange little windows into how much your perception is shaped by invisible forces. You're not just reacting to what's in front of you. You're reacting to a deeper layer, to the feeling of a sound, to the shape of a word, to patterns you've never been taught but somehow still know. And all it takes to prove that is a nonsense word and two shapes. Reduplicative Paramnesia. You're standing in a hospital room. The nurses are kind. The machines are beeping. You see familiar faces. You recognize the furniture, the layout, the smells. Everything feels normal, except you're convinced that this hospital is not where they say it is. You're sure, completely sure, that you've been moved. Maybe even duplicated. You tell the doctors this is not the real hospital. This is a copy, a perfect fake. Or maybe the hospital exists in two places at once. Same layout, same people, but in the wrong location. And no matter how much they argue with you, show you maps, photos, records, You don't budge. You feel it in your bones. You're in the wrong place, but you're not lost. You're not confused about who you are. You're just sure this place should be somewhere else. That's reduplicative paramnesia. And it's one of the most mind-bending illusions your brain can produce. It doesn't mess with your vision. It doesn't erase your memory. It distorts your internal GPS. Your spatial awareness breaks in a very specific way. The place you're standing in gets duplicated in your mind, or shifted to a different location. You still see what's in front of you, but you believe you're seeing it somewhere else, or in more than one place at the same time. It often shows up after brain injury, especially when damage hits the right frontal lobe or parts of the brain involved in spatial memory. And when it hits, it doesn't feel like a dream or confusion. It feels factual, like you've caught the world in a lie. That's what makes it so eerie. People with this condition are often calm, logical, and articulate. They're not hallucinating. They can tell you where they are. They can describe their surroundings accurately. They just insist those surroundings are in the wrong place. One of the most famous cases was a man who was hospitalized in Boston. Every time staff entered the room, he insisted they had moved the entire hospital to his hometown in Maine. He recognized the people, the machines, the hallway outside, but not the location. He said it was a duplicate, a replica of the Boston hospital built right near his house, and the reason it felt identical, because it was supposed to. It was built to trick people. This isn't delusion in the cartoon sense. It's not wild or chaotic. It's structured. The brain is working with what it has: sensory input, memory, logic, but the wiring underneath is scrambled. Your memory says one thing, your senses say another, and instead of choosing one, the brain invents a third story that fits both. If the hospital looks like Boston but feels like Maine, then maybe it's a copy. That satisfies the contradiction. You might think this only happens in extreme injury cases, but echoes of it show up in everyday life too. Think about déjà vu, that feeling that you've been somewhere before, even though you know you haven't, or that moment when you walk into a new building and feel like the layout is familiar. That's your brain cross-referencing spatial memories. Usually it gets it right. Sometimes it glitches. The key thing with reduplicative paramnesia is that the memory of place, the emotional weight of where you think you are, overrules the facts of where you actually are. You see the room, but your brain insists it belongs somewhere else. This tells us something huge about how place is stored in the mind. It's not just coordinates or visual data. It's tied to emotional context, to identity, to habit. And when that connection breaks, the brain doesn't just say, "I don't know." It says, "I know exactly where I am, and I know you're wrong." There's also a deeper fear this condition reveals. How much of your reality depends on your internal map matching what's in front of you. Most of the time, that happens without you thinking. You walk into your kitchen and instantly feel grounded. You sit at a familiar cafe and feel at ease. That sense of location is not just about recognition. It's about certainty. When that certainty is gone, the world doesn't just feel unfamiliar. It feels wrong. People with reduplicative paramnesia aren't confused in the way you'd expect. They're convinced. That conviction makes the illusion harder to crack, and from a brain perspective, it makes sense. The regions that handle belief and reasoning are often still functioning. It's the connection to spatial truth that's broken. So the brain, in trying to make sense of its inputs, lands on a solution that sounds bizarre from the outside but feels completely rational from the inside. It's like a dream where the logic makes perfect sense while you're in it. Then you wake up and think, wait, that couldn't have happened. Reduplicative paramnesia is like being trapped in that dream logic while fully awake. The people around you are real. The room is real. The belief that the room belongs somewhere else, also real, at least to your mind. And once that belief locks in, it becomes your truth. Chronostasis. You glance at a clock. The second hand seems frozen for just a moment, like it's stuck. Then it jumps forward and ticks normally. That first second felt longer than it should have, like time itself paused for you. That's not your imagination. That's a glitch in your perception called chronostasis. Your brain edited your experience of time, and you didn't even notice it happening. Chronostasis literally means time standing still, and it kicks in the moment you shift your gaze. Let's say you're looking at something, a phone, a wall, whatever, and then your eyes move suddenly to a clock. In that tiny instant when your eyes are jumping, your brain blanks out the incoming visual information. It doesn't show you the blur. It fills in that gap with a smooth image. It's called saccadic masking. You don't see your eyes move. You just land at the new object. But in that short blackout, something weird happens. Your brain stretches the moment after the eye movement to fill in the time you missed. So the second hand appears frozen, not because time actually stopped, but because your mind extended that moment retroactively as if it lasted longer. The result? That first second you see feels longer than every second after. It's an illusion your brain creates to keep your sense of time consistent, even when your eyes are constantly darting around. And the weird part is that your brain is editing the past. It's not just adjusting your future sense of time. It's telling you that what you just saw lasted longer than it really did. This doesn't only happen with clocks. Clocks just make it obvious because they give you a hard, mechanical reference point. You can actually watch the hand not move. But this distortion is probably happening all the time, every time your eyes move rapidly from one thing to another. It's just that in normal life, you have no easy way to catch it. Think about how unsettling that is. You trust your sense of time. It feels like one of the most basic things. A constant flow, ticking forward, 1 second after the next. But your experience of time is built from tiny pieces, stitched together, with gaps quietly erased. And during those gaps, your brain doesn't leave a hole. It lies. It stretches time to cover the cut. And it does it so smoothly, you never feel the edit. Chronostasis was first studied using what's called the stopped clock illusion. Researchers noticed that when people looked quickly from one thing to a ticking clock, they often reported the second hand seemed to hesitate or freeze. Later studies confirmed that this wasn't a fluke. The illusion is real, and it's tied directly to eye movements, especially saccades, which are the rapid, jerky motions your eyes make when shifting focus. Your brain basically says, I missed a bit of visual data while the eyes were moving, so I'll just paste in what comes after and pretend it was there the whole time. But that paste is longer than the moment it replaces. You think you're perceiving time in a continuous stream, but you're really experiencing a highlight reel. Carefully edited, seamlessly produced, completely artificial. And the more you look into it, the more you realize how flexible your sense of time actually is. Time feels slower when you're scared, faster when you're bored. It dilates under stress, contracts during routine. And chronostasis is just one example of how your brain shapes time to fit your expectations. It wants continuity. It wants smoothness, so it cheats. And because it's your own brain doing the cheating, you trust it. But that trust is misplaced. The illusion shows just how much of your perception is filled in after the fact. You don't experience the world as it is. You experience a version of it that's been cleaned up, edited for clarity, made to feel smooth and stable. Your brain hates visual chaos. It hates jumps. It wants narrative. So when your eyes cut from one point to another and there's no input, the brain just decides how long that moment lasted and drops it into the timeline like a frame in a video. Here's something even stranger. The illusion doesn't feel like an illusion. You don't say, "Oh, that clock looks weird." You say, "That second took too long." You believe the moment actually lasted longer. You experience it as a truth, not a trick. And unless someone points it out to you, you never question it. That's the real twist. The illusion is not just in what you see. It's in what you believe you experienced. Chronostasis peels back the idea that time is something external, something ticking away regardless of what you're doing. It shows that time, as you feel it, is constructed, rewritten, filtered through memory, attention, and the simple need to make sense of what just happened. You think the second hand froze, but what really happened is your brain missed a beat and covered it up with a lie that felt exactly like the truth. Thatcher Effect. You're scrolling through faces online and come across a photo that looks totally normal. Just someone smiling, looking straight at the camera. Then you rotate the image right side up, and suddenly it's horrifying. The eyes are flipped. The mouth is upside down. It's a grotesque, almost comical distortion, and you wonder how you didn't notice it before. The face was upside down, but it looked fine. Until it wasn't. That's the Thatcher Effect, and it exposes something huge about how your brain processes faces. When a face is upside down, you don't just see it differently. You lose access to the very tools you normally use to detect something is wrong. Your ability to judge facial structure, emotional expression, even basic features. It collapses. What's wild is that the exact same image, without any edits, flips from normal to disturbing just by turning it right side up. Here's what's going on. Your brain is incredibly tuned in to faces. You've got a whole specialized network for it. It lives mostly in the fusiform gyrus, part of the temporal lobe. This region helps you process faces holistically. That means it doesn't analyze individual features one at a time. It takes the whole face in as a single unit, mapping the eyes, nose, mouth, and expressions all at once. That's why you can recognize someone instantly, even from a blurry photo or a weird angle. But the second a face is turned upside down, your brain starts analyzing it like an object, not a person. It loses that holistic processing and breaks the image down feature by feature. That switch strips away your ability to see how wrong something really is. You can still tell it's a face, but you can't quite tell what's off about it. In the original experiment that named this effect, scientists altered a photo of Margaret Thatcher by inverting her eyes and mouth. When shown upside down, people barely noticed anything strange. But when shown right side up, the same image became grotesque. That huge emotional reaction, the jarring wrongness, only kicks in when your facial recognition system is switched back on. It's not just about faces being upside down. It's about how orientation controls the part of your brain that gets activated. When that system is on, Even tiny changes feel massive. You can tell when someone's smile is fake. You can detect subtle shifts in eyebrow tension or eye shape. You know when something feels off, even if you can't say why. But turn that face upside down, and all that sensitivity vanishes. You go into object mode. You see lines and shapes, not expressions, not emotions. And this tells you something disturbing about how fragile your perception really is. You think you're walking around seeing the world as it is, full detail, full awareness. But you're not. You're seeing a version of it that only works under the right conditions. Tilt something just slightly, take it out of its familiar frame, and your brain can completely fail to pick up what should be obvious. It's not just faces. The same principle shows up in language. Ever tried to read text that's been mirrored or flipped? Suddenly, your reading system shuts down. You have to sound out each letter. What was once instant becomes awkward. You're not broken. Your brain just isn't wired to handle that flipped format. The Thatcher Effect is the facial version of that breakdown. And it reveals how context-dependent your intelligence really is. Now, here's the kicker. Even after you've seen the altered face right side up, even when you know it's wrong, when you flip it upside down again, your brain still fails to detect the weirdness. That tells us the illusion is not just visual, it's perceptual. You're not being tricked by what you're seeing. You're being tricked by how you process what you're seeing, and the consequences go deeper than just photos. In real life, we rely on facial cues constantly. Trust, fear, attraction, anger. All of it rides on your ability to interpret a face quickly and accurately. So when your brain can be this easily derailed, it makes you wonder how much you're missing in everyday interactions. How much of what you assume to be true about someone's expression, mood, or intent is just your brain filling in blanks? The Thatcher Effect is funny at first. People laugh when they see it, but then they flip the photo, and that laugh turns into discomfort. The same way something familiar suddenly becomes uncanny. Your brain realizes it missed something it shouldn't have missed, and that feeling sticks. Because it's not just about seeing a distorted face. It's about realizing how unreliable your perception really is. The illusion doesn't break when you understand it. That's what makes it powerful. Even once you know what's coming, the effect still works. The brain's rules don't change just because you caught them in the act. And that's the scariest part. You can be wrong, completely wrong, and feel totally confident about it. Tachypsychia. You're in a car, and the brakes fail. Everything moves slow. The truck ahead grows larger, but not fast enough. You feel like you have time to react, to turn, to think. Or maybe you're falling, and you swear the air stretches around you. You can see each frame of the fall like it's being played in slow motion. But later, when you try to explain it, you realize only a second passed, maybe two. Time didn't slow down. Your brain sped up. That's tachypsychia. It's a distortion in how you perceive time, usually triggered by extreme stress. Your sense of the clock breaks. Seconds feel stretched. Thoughts come faster. You move quickly, but feel calm, even precise. Like someone turned up the processing power inside your head. It doesn't happen every time you're scared. It hits when your body thinks survival is on the line. And when it does, it feels like a superpower. But it's not. It's a glitch wrapped in instinct. Tachypsychia comes from a burst of adrenaline and the activation of your fight or flight system. When the brain senses immediate danger, it prioritizes survival above everything. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, attention sharpens, and perception of time, that normally steady background hum, fractures. The world doesn't actually slow down. What's happening is your brain takes in more detail than usual, stores more information, and builds the memory in high definition. So when you replay it, it feels longer than it was. There was a study where people were dropped from a tower wearing special wrist devices that flashed numbers too fast for normal perception. The question was whether their sense of time would slow enough in free fall to read the numbers. They couldn't. Their perception hadn't truly sped up in the moment. But afterward, their memories of the fall felt longer, more stretched. That told researchers something important. Tachypsychia doesn't give you superhuman reflexes. It gives you a warped sense of how long things lasted, but only after the fact. What you feel in the moment isn't always speed. It can feel like focus, like being pulled into the now so intensely that you're hyper-aware of everything. Sounds feel sharper. Movement is more vivid. You can feel your body before it moves, and that creates the illusion of time expanding. You remember more. And because you remember more, you assume more time must have passed. This can happen in a gunfight, in combat, during a near miss on the freeway, in the middle of a panic attack. It can also happen during flow states, those rare moments when you're so immersed in something that you lose track of the clock entirely. Except in those states, time feels fast. It flies by. Tachypsychia flips that. It makes you feel like every millisecond is 10 times longer, because your mind is lighting up like a switchboard, grabbing every detail, every possibility, every escape route. Here's where it gets strange. Sometimes, this effect isn't helpful. People think they're moving in slow motion, but they're actually rushing, overcorrecting, panicking. The memory tells them they had all the time in the world. But video footage shows they were reacting too fast, not too slow. That's why tachypsychia is dangerous. You trust your perception, and it lies. You think you're calculating. You think you're in control. But really, you're just inside a brain trying to process fear. And the illusion doesn't just affect movement or memory. It can also mess with sound. People report hearing voices slowed down, like they're underwater. Some describe echoes, distortions, or a strange quiet that feels wrong. Others say everything becomes louder, more urgent, like the world is shouting. All of this is the brain shifting gears, flooding attention to the senses it thinks matter most. What this shows is that your perception of time is not fixed. It's not a hardwired truth. It's a flexible, constantly updated guess based on memory, emotion, and focus. You feel like time is a straight line, but it's more like a spotlight. It brightens and dims depending on where you're looking and what you're feeling. Tachypsychia turns up the brightness so high that even a moment burns into your memory as a lifetime. People who've survived near-death experiences often talk about this. They say time stopped, that everything slowed down, and they could think clearly, even as danger closed in. What's wild is that this effect can be so strong that people come out of the event feeling grateful for the clarity. Even if the memory is terrifying, they feel like they saw the truth of a moment, the sharp edge of reality, and survived it. But here's the truth. You didn't slow time. You didn't become superhuman. You just caught a glimpse of how fast your brain can really go when it thinks it has no choice. Saccadic masking. There's something your eyes are doing right now that you're completely unaware of. Every few seconds, they're snapping from one point to another, sometimes hundreds of times per minute. And every time they do, your brain turns off your vision for a split second. You literally go blind. Not metaphorically. Not just distracted. Fully blind. But you never notice it. That's saccadic masking. Saccades are those quick, jerky movements your eyes make as they shift focus. Like when you're reading a line of text or glancing from one face to another in a crowd. These movements are fast, really fast, up to 500 degrees per second. If your brain didn't step in, the world would blur like a chaotic mess during each jump. But it doesn't, because your brain has a trick. It shuts off your visual processing during the motion, blanks it out completely, and replaces it with the image that comes after. It's like an invisible edit, a perfect cut and paste job you're never supposed to notice. And the result, you walk around thinking you see the world as it really is, in one smooth, continuous stream. But in truth, you're living in a stitched-up timeline. Constant interruptions, constant blanks, covered up by a brain that's more interested in stability than accuracy. Here's how deep it goes. Studies have shown that during a saccade, even if a massive change happens in your field of view, like a whole object disappearing or flipping, you probably won't notice it. You'll land your gaze on the new image and just accept it. This is not just a tiny blind spot. This is a full override, and it's happening all day, every day, without your permission. What's really wild is how confidently your brain fills in the blanks. It doesn't leave gaps. It doesn't tell you, hey, you missed something. It just lies. It gives you the impression that you saw everything, that there was no disruption. This is not a bug, it's a feature. Your brain is built to prioritize continuity. If it had to process the blur and chaos of every eye movement, your world would be a nauseating mess. So it cheats, and it's very good at cheating. There's a famous experiment that shows just how far this can go. Subjects were asked to look at a screen where an image would change during a saccade. Something would shift position, or a face would subtly morph. And people didn't notice, even though the change happened right in front of them. Their brains just accepted the new image as if nothing had happened, because the saccadic mask kicked in and erased the transition. Now think about what this means. You assume that what you're seeing right now is the full picture, but it's not. You're only seeing the points where your eyes stop. The rest, that's edited out. And this isn't some fringe phenomenon. This is how vision works. You're never really seeing everything. You're just sampling, taking snapshots, and trusting that your brain will do the rest. Even your sense of motion depends on this trick. If your brain didn't suppress visual input during saccades, the world would feel like it's shaking violently every time your eyes moved. You'd be overwhelmed, disoriented, maybe even sick. Instead, the brain plays a clever game. It deletes the motion, gives you the before and after, and convinces you that nothing moved at all. But the illusion is so complete that it raises uncomfortable questions. If your brain is willing to erase what actually happens, just to keep you comfortable, how much else is it hiding? What other edits are being made that you never see? How many moments in your life felt smooth, real, coherent, but were actually stitched together from fragmented, missing data? And it doesn't stop at vision. Saccadic masking is part of a larger system your brain uses to manage perception. It filters what you hear, feel, even remember, based on what it decides is important. You never experience reality raw. You experience a curated version, preselected, smoothed out, built for narrative. That should make you question everything. You think you remember an event clearly, but your eyes may have skipped. You might have missed a key detail during a blink of blindness you didn't even know was happening. And yet you feel sure. You'd bet on it. Because your brain doesn't just trick your senses. It tricks your confidence too. The most haunting part is that you can't stop it. You can't train yourself to see during a saccade. You can't override the mask. It's hardwired. Automatic. You'll never catch it in real time. You'll always be one step behind the edit. That's how deep the illusion runs. So the next time you look around a room, or glance at a face, or scan a page, remember, you're not seeing it all. You're only seeing what your brain decides is clean enough to show you. The rest got cut, silently, effortlessly, like it was never there. Troxler Effect. Stare at a single point on the wall for long enough, and the world around it starts to melt away. The colors fade. Shapes disappear. Sometimes it feels like the edges of your vision are fogging over, or like the room is being swallowed by some kind of white noise. You blink, and suddenly everything comes rushing back. That's not your eyes failing. That's your brain deleting reality. This is the Troxler Effect. It happens when you lock your gaze on one unmoving thing for too long. Your brain decides the stuff around it is no longer relevant. So it scrubs it out, fades it, blurs it, until it just isn't there anymore. This is not a trick of light or tired vision. It's perceptual erasure. Your brain is literally removing information from your conscious experience, and it happens faster than you think. The first time you experience it, it can be subtle. You stare at a red dot in the center of a screen, and the blue ring around it slowly vanishes. Not all at once, piece by piece, like it's dissolving into the background. But it was there a second ago. Your eyes haven't moved. The image hasn't changed, so why is it gone? Because your brain has a job: cut out the noise. Every second, your sensory system is flooded with signals. Too much to process, too much to care about. So your brain creates rules. If something doesn't move, if it doesn't change, if it isn't directly important to your focus, get rid of it. Save the energy. Keep the spotlight on what matters. It's the same reason you stop noticing the feeling of your clothes, or the pressure of the chair beneath you, or the hum of a refrigerator after a few minutes. You didn't lose those sensations. Your brain just marked them as irrelevant and muted them. The Troxler Effect is that same system applied to vision. A quiet auto delete function built right into the way you perceive the world. And here's where it gets strange. This isn't just about a colored shape on a screen. It applies to your entire field of view. You think your vision is stable and continuous, but it's more like a spotlight that moves around, checking for updates. And when there are no updates, it stops checking. So the background fades. Things vanish. Not because they're gone, but because your brain doesn't feel like reporting them to you anymore. There are illusions that take this even further. In one version, you look at a flickering face with just enough movement to keep it right on the edge of your focus. And suddenly, the face morphs into something grotesque. Not because the image changed, but because your brain tried to fade out the unchanging features and messed up the whole perception. The human brain is not wired for stillness. It needs motion, contrast, novelty. Without that, it starts filling in the blanks, and sometimes it fills them in wrong. Think about the implications. This means you can literally stop seeing something that is right in front of you, not because of distraction, not because you're looking elsewhere, but because your brain quietly decided it didn't matter anymore. This is a blind spot that moves with your attention, and the moment you stop paying attention to something, it starts slipping away. People sometimes describe spiritual experiences where the world seems to melt or fade into pure whiteness. Some of that may be explained by this exact effect. When the mind locks into deep stillness, whether through meditation, trance, or fatigue, the visual system can begin to disengage. The world gets quiet. Details disappear. It feels profound. But part of it might just be a glitch in how your perception works. And here's something else to consider. The Troxler Effect is one more piece of evidence that you're not experiencing reality in full. You're getting the edited version. The efficient version. The version filtered through layers of assumptions, expectations, and shortcuts. And you trust it. You think what you see is what's there. But every time you focus too hard, you start to lose the edges. The real world starts slipping through the cracks. This isn't just about optical illusions. It's about how fragile your sense of presence really is. You can be in a room, looking directly at someone, and still not see them. You can lose track of objects' backgrounds, or even your own body in space. All because your brain is optimizing, cutting corners, protecting you from being overwhelmed by all the raw data. What the Troxler Effect shows is that your attention is the gatekeeper of your reality. What you don't focus on fades, sometimes literally. It makes you wonder how many things in your life are disappearing right in front of you. Not because they're gone, but because you stopped looking. Ganzfeld Effect. Take a ping-pong ball, cut it in half, tape each side over your eyes, and turn on a soft red light. Now put on some headphones playing white noise. The sound of static, no rhythm, no melody, just a constant wash. Sit still. Wait, and something strange starts to happen. The world begins to shift. You might see colors that aren't there, feel like you're floating, or even start to hear voices that no one is speaking. That's the Ganzfeld Effect. And it shows just how badly your brain needs stimulation, and what it does when it doesn't get any. The word Ganzfeld comes from German. It means complete field. In this case, it refers to a field of sensory input that is totally uniform. No edges, no contrast, no movement, no change. Your brain is used to change. It's built for noise, motion, edges, color, variation. Take all that away and something weird kicks in. Instead of silence, you get hallucinations. Not because you're dreaming, not because you're crazy, but because your brain is trying to fill in the void. In a normal situation, your senses are flooded. Light bounces around your eyes. Sounds come from all directions. Your body feels pressure, heat, texture. But in a Ganzfeld setup, that flood stops. The input gets reduced to a flat nothing. A soft light that never changes, a noise that never shifts, and the brain freaks out a little. It starts to invent signals to replace what it expects to receive. People report seeing swirling patterns, glowing figures, tunnels, sometimes even faces. They hear footsteps, music, whispers. Some feel like they're floating. Others describe a sense of falling. And it's not always pleasant. For some, it feels like the beginning of a dream. For others, it's deeply unsettling, like being trapped in a void that stares back. This is not just a party trick or some new age thing. The Ganzfeld effect has been studied for decades. Psychologists have used it to explore altered states of consciousness, sensory deprivation, and even telepathy research. Not because it proves anything supernatural, but because it shows how thin the boundary is between perception and imagination. You'd think if you cut off stimulation, the brain would just go quiet, but it doesn't. It ramps up, it searches, and when it finds nothing, it starts creating. It's like standing in a room where no one is speaking, and your mind begins to imagine voices just to fill the silence. This effect shows how little it takes to push the brain out of consensus reality and into something entirely self-generated. What's even stranger is how quickly it happens. You don't need hours in a dark chamber. Sometimes within minutes, the brain starts glitching. The eyes, starved for motion, begin to amplify any visual noise. The auditory system does the same, picking up and exaggerating microsignals until they feel like something meaningful. And the mind, desperate for interpretation, starts forming patterns, faces, words, movement. The Ganzfeld effect is different from dreaming because you're awake. Your critical thinking is still online, but your sensory system is drifting. That combination, alert mind and muted senses, is what creates the strange in-between state. You know you're not hallucinating in the traditional sense, but you also know you're not seeing or hearing reality anymore. You're stuck in the gap between boredom and perception, and it bends your experience in a way that feels deeply personal. In some experiments, people even reported out of body sensations or feeling like their limbs were disappearing. That's because your sense of your body relies on a constant stream of sensory feedback. Touch, balance, position. When that stream drops to zero, the brain loses track, and when it loses track, it starts to guess. Some of those guesses are pretty wild. But the most important thing about the Ganzfeld effect isn't the hallucinations. It's what it tells you about how fragile your reality really is. You assume the world you perceive is stable, grounded, and external. But this effect strips that away. It shows that your brain is doing a constant dance between what's out there and what it expects. And when what's out there gets too quiet, the expectations take over. And then you're not observing the world anymore. You're watching your own mind. People pay to experience this. Float tanks, sensory deprivation chambers, experimental therapy sessions. They want to know what's behind the noise of daily life. But the truth is, what's behind the noise isn't some great cosmic secret. It's just your brain, stripped of input, revealing how much of your reality was being constructed all along. And once you experience that, even for a few minutes, it's hard to go back to trusting your senses the same way, because now you know if the signal goes quiet enough, your brain will just make something up. And it won't tell you it's doing it. It'll just show you something that feels real. Until it doesn't. Hyperbolic discounting. You're sitting there, and you have two options. You can get $50 right now, or you can wait 1 month and get $100. And even though the second option is clearly better, part of your brain is screaming, take the 50. Take it now. That feeling is not random. It's not impatience. It's a glitch in how we value time, and it has a name. Hyperbolic discounting. This is one of the weirdest, most frustrating illusions your brain plays on you. Because it doesn't just mess with how you see the world. It hijacks your decision-making. It tricks you into choosing what feels good now over what's actually better later. And it's not a simple mistake. It's built into how your brain calculates value. You literally discount the future, and you do it in a very specific way. Here's what that means. If I tell you that you can have 1 cookie today or 2 cookies tomorrow, your brain tends to say, forget tomorrow, just give me the cookie. But if I ask you to choose between 1 cookie in a year or 2 cookies in a year and 1 day, you're more likely to wait the extra day, even though the deal is the same. Wait 1 day and get double. Your brain sees it completely differently depending on how close the decision feels. And that's the trap. We don't discount the future in a straight line. We do it in a curve. That's where the hyperbolic part comes in. The closer a reward is, the more irrationally tempting it becomes. The farther away it is, the more willing we are to be logical. So in the long term, you plan to save, eat healthy, study, be patient. But in the short term, you blow your budget, skip the gym, binge your shows, and stay up too late. Because the future version of you is calm and rational, but the present you is in panic mode, just trying to feel good now, and it's not about weakness. This happens to everyone. The wiring for hyperbolic discounting is deep. It comes from a time when immediate rewards were more reliable than promises. Back when food today meant survival and food tomorrow meant maybe starving. So the brain evolved to grab what it could when it could, even if that strategy doesn't work so well in a world of credit cards, online shopping, and endless temptations. One study showed that people would take smaller rewards today over significantly larger ones just a few days later. Not months, days. The difference wasn't logical. It was emotional. When the reward is now, it lights up the brain's pleasure centers. It feels close, real, touchable. But when the reward is delayed, even by a little, it gets moved into this foggy zone where it feels uncertain and distant. And that fog is where long-term goals go to die. Think about how many times this shows up in your life. You set a goal. You want to learn a language. You want to build a business. You want to get in shape. And at first, it feels exciting. You can see the end result. But then a few days in, the reward is still far away, and suddenly scrolling or snacking or putting it off feels better. Not because it actually is better, but because your brain is miscalculating the value of later. This is why procrastination is so common. It's not that you're lazy. It's that the task has no immediate payoff. The discomfort is now. The reward is later. So the brain discounts it, pushes it aside, treats it like it barely matters, until the deadline gets close enough to feel immediate. And then, suddenly, the brain starts to care again. Because now the pain of failure is real. Now it's close. And so now, it finally feels worth acting on. Hyperbolic discounting also wrecks people financially. You tell yourself you'll start saving next month. You'll pay off the debt later. You'll invest when you have more. But those future plans keep getting buried under present urges. Spend now. Enjoy now. Deal with it later. And by the time later comes, you've already made choices that are hard to reverse. All because your brain told you a small reward today was worth more than a big reward tomorrow. What's really frustrating is that we know we're doing it. You can see the better choice. You can explain it. But that doesn't stop the impulse. That's because the brain uses two systems. One fast and emotional, the other slow and rational. Hyperbolic discounting lights up the fast system. It feels right even when it isn't. And the rational system has to fight hard just to keep you from diving into the quick fix. There are ways to counter it. Some people automate their decisions, set up savings accounts that withdraw before they see the money, remove snacks from the house so the temptation is farther away, use timers and blockers to prevent impulsive clicks. These tricks work not because people are strong, but because they know how weak that impulse can be when it hits. Understanding this illusion doesn't make it go away, but it helps you see how much of your daily life is shaped by something invisible. A constant tug of war between now and later, and most of the time, now wins. Not because it's better, just because it feels closer. Semantic satiation. Say the word apple out loud. Now say it again. And again. Keep going. Apple. 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 After a while, something weird starts to happen. The word begins to lose meaning. It sounds hollow, foreign, like just a bunch of syllables slapped together. It stops feeling like a fruit. It stops feeling like anything. That's semantic satiation, a bizarre little glitch where repetition makes language fall apart. It doesn't take long for it to kick in, usually 10 or 15 seconds of saying the same word over and over is enough. And it's not just that the word gets annoying. It actually stops registering as meaningful in your brain. It becomes noise. You can still hear it. You can still pronounce it. But it no longer triggers the concept it used to carry. And for something as fundamental as language, that's unsettling. Your brain normally runs language processing on autopilot. You hear a word, and your mind instantly connects it to an idea, an object, a feeling. It's fast, seamless. You don't even think about it. But when you repeat the word too much in a short burst, that automatic connection gets disrupted. It's like your neural circuit for that word overheats. The signal fades. The meaning breaks down, and all you're left with is sound. It's similar to what happens when you stare at a single image for too long and the edges begin to blur, or when you hear the same song on loop and it stops registering as music. That's called perceptual adaptation. And semantic satiation is that same kind of adaptation applied to language. The repetition overwhelms the system, and the brain pulls the plug on meaning. This is not just some silly trick you can do to amuse yourself. It's a window into how unstable meaning really is. You think of language as solid, reliable, but in reality, it's a constant exchange of electrical signals and interpretations. Words only mean something because your brain is trained to connect the sound with the right idea. And if that connection is forced to fire too many times too quickly, it short circuits. What's even stranger is that this doesn't happen when someone else is repeating the word. It has to come from you. You have to be the one saying or hearing the word repeatedly in a very tight time frame. That's because it's not just about the sound. It's about the feedback loop between your sensory system and your memory. The repetition forces the system to work harder than it's used to. And at some point, it just gives up. People describe the sensation in different ways. Some say it feels like the word is no longer real. Others say it turns into a kind of mental static. A few even get this weird disorientation, like they're suddenly detached from the thing they were saying. It can make you question how language ever felt normal to begin with. If a single word can lose its meaning this fast, what does that say about the whole structure of how we communicate? You might not notice it often, but this kind of thing happens more than you think. Have you ever read a word too many times while editing something and suddenly it looks misspelled even though it's not? Or heard someone say a word in a strange tone and it suddenly feels alien? That's the same breakdown happening on a smaller scale. The brain is looking for patterns, and when those patterns loop too tightly, the brain starts canceling them out. There's also something quietly disturbing about it. Words are the core of how we shape thoughts. But if words can dissolve under pressure, then the thoughts themselves start to feel a little shakier. Semantic satiation is like a crack in the foundation, a reminder that the connection between sound and meaning is learned, fragile, and easy to disrupt. It makes you wonder how many of your thoughts are just loops that haven't broken yet. In psychology, semantic satiation has been used to study everything from short-term memory to the limits of cognitive processing. It even shows up in marketing. If a brand name is repeated too many times in an ad, it can actually lose its persuasive power for a moment. Not just because it's annoying, but because the brain literally stops assigning meaning to it. It becomes background noise. And get this effect isn't limited to spoken language. You can trigger it by typing the same word repeatedly, or even thinking it over and over. The loop just has to be tight enough and fast enough. It's all about exhausting that fragile neural link between the word and the idea. So the next time you find yourself stuck on a word, unable to tell if it's spelled right or if it even sounds real anymore, now you know what's happening. It's not a glitch in your intelligence. It's a feature of your brain trying to keep the signal clean by dumping the parts that are firing too hard, too fast. What makes this illusion different from the others is that it's not visual, it's not emotional, it's not even sensory in the traditional way. It's cognitive. It's a breakdown in the machinery that gives structure to everything else, and all it takes is a little repetition for the whole thing to collapse in on itself like a house of cards. Cognitive tunneling. There's this thing your brain does in high-stress moments that feels like it should help, but it actually makes everything worse. You get overloaded, too much is happening at once, and suddenly your attention collapses inward. You zero in on one detail, one screen, one dial, one sound, and you block out everything else. That's cognitive tunneling. And when it happens, you're not thinking clearly anymore. You're just staring. Imagine you're driving at night, and a warning light flashes on the dashboard. It's not even that urgent, just a tire pressure alert or something minor. But for some reason, your brain locks onto it. You keep glancing down, checking it again, maybe fiddling with the settings, maybe trying to figure out if it's serious. And in doing that, you miss the turn you were supposed to make. Or worse, you miss the kid running into the road. That's how cognitive tunneling takes something small and makes it dangerous. You tunnel in and lose the bigger picture. Your brain has limited bandwidth. It can't track everything at once, especially under stress, so it prioritizes. That's useful when you're focusing on a task, but in high-pressure situations, that focus becomes narrow. Too narrow. And it's not just selective attention. It's a collapse of situational awareness. You're locked in on the thing that feels most urgent, not the thing that's actually most important. What's wild is that this happens even to experts. Pilots, surgeons, soldiers. People trained to operate in complex environments fall into cognitive tunneling all the time. A pilot might fixate on one instrument and miss a crucial radio call. A surgeon might focus on a bleeding vessel and not notice the patient's oxygen levels are dropping. These aren't beginner mistakes. They're the brain's survival response working against itself. Researchers have studied this in flight simulations and emergency scenarios. One study found that under pressure, people often stare at a single interface even when it's giving them no new information. Just blankly looking at it, convinced it holds the answer. That's the tunnel. Your mental field of view shrinks. You feel like you're analyzing, but you're really just looping. And here's the twist. It doesn't feel like panic. Cognitive tunneling doesn't come with alarm bells. It feels like concentration. It feels like control. That's what makes it so dangerous. You don't realize you've narrowed your attention until it's too late. You think you're solving the problem, when really, you're missing everything else. One real-life example is the crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 in 1972. The crew got distracted by a tiny malfunction, a landing gear indicator light that wasn't working. They were so focused on figuring out if the gear was down that they didn't notice the autopilot had quietly disengaged. The plane slowly descended. No one was watching the altitude, and it crashed into the Florida Everglades, all over a light bulb. That's the brutal cost of cognitive tunneling. You see it in everyday life too. Ever had a moment where you're frantically searching for your keys, only to realize they've been in your hand the whole time? Your brain decided the problem was location, not the object itself, and you tunneled in. Or maybe you've had a heated argument where you're so locked on proving your point that you miss the other person's emotional signals entirely. You win the logic, but you lose the connection. That's tunneling on a social level. The mechanism behind this illusion is tied to the brain's attention system. When stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline spike, and your brain goes into threat mode. And threat mode isn't curious. It doesn't want exploration or creativity. It wants answers. Now it picks a target and locks on. This worked great in a jungle when you needed to focus on a predator in the bushes. But it backfires when you're juggling dozens of abstract inputs, like we do today. Some cognitive scientists describe attention like a spotlight. Under normal conditions, it moves smoothly across your mental landscape. But under stress, the spotlight freezes. It stops scanning, and it shines too brightly on one tiny area while everything else fades into black. That's when mistakes happen. Not because you didn't have the information, but because you stopped looking. It's not about intelligence. Smart people tunnel just as hard as anyone else. Sometimes even harder, because they're used to trusting their thinking. But no amount of IQ stops that attention collapse once stress kicks in. It's a physiological process, and the only real defense is awareness, training yourself to notice when you're narrowing in too much, learning to step back, shift your gaze, scan the environment even when it feels like you already know what matters. Airlines and emergency response teams now train for this. They create checklists, build team protocols, add audible alerts. Anything to shake someone out of the tunnel before it costs lives. Because once you're deep inside it, logic doesn't always pull you out. You need external cues. You need systems that help you zoom back out when your brain is zooming in too far. Cognitive tunneling is a perfect example of how the mind, in trying to protect you, can actually betray you. It feels like focus. It feels like control. But it's not. It's a trap. And unless you catch it in real time, you don't even realize you're in it. Akinetopsia, movement, is something you don't really think about. You see it, you react to it, and your brain handles the rest. But for some people, that entire experience just breaks. Not a little, completely. They can see the world just fine, objects, faces, colors. But the second anything starts to move, it all falls apart. That condition is called akinetopsia, and it makes motion invisible. Imagine trying to pour a cup of coffee. You lift the pot, tilt it, and instead of a smooth stream, all you see is frozen frames. First the pot upright, then suddenly tilted, then liquid already pooled in the cup. No motion in between. Just static shots, like snapshots that skip. The coffee isn't flowing, it's teleporting. That's what Akinetopsia does. It turns the world into a series of still images, stripped of all motion continuity. It's not blurry. It's not slow. It's completely static between frames. Your brain just stops filling in the gaps. That connection between one moment and the next is gone. And without motion, everything becomes chaotic. Walking through a crowd, impossible. Cars and people are in different spots every time you blink. Crosswalks are terrifying. Traffic feels like it appears out of nowhere. The world is jump-cutting constantly, and you're stuck trying to guess what just happened between the skips. This isn't about eyesight. The eyes are working. The problem is in the brain. Specifically, an area called V5 or MT, located in the middle temporal cortex. That's the part responsible for detecting motion. When it's damaged, through trauma, stroke, or surgery, the brain can no longer process movement as continuous. So the eyes send the data, but the brain fails to animate it. There was one documented case that really puts it into perspective. A woman named LM, after a stroke, developed Akinetopsia. She described how people looked like they appeared and reappeared in new positions as they moved. She couldn't follow lips when someone spoke. Even the flow of water was impossible to track. It just looked like frozen moments of splash. She had to count aloud while crossing the street, estimating how fast she needed to walk based on the last known position of cars. The entire world had turned into a slideshow. What this reveals is something wild. Your experience of motion is not a direct perception. It's a reconstruction, a guess built from raw data and filled in by your brain. You think you're seeing things move in real time, but that's not really true. Your brain is constantly stitching moments together, predicting where objects are going to be, smoothing out the noise. And when that system breaks, the truth comes out. There is no real motion, only updates, only changes in position. The flow is something your brain invents. This illusion goes even deeper when you realize how much of life depends on motion perception. Reading facial expressions, driving, pouring liquids, navigating space, even recognizing danger. Motion is often the first signal we pick up. A fast movement, a subtle flinch, a sudden approach. Without that, it's like watching the world in freeze frame, with no warning and no continuity. What's really unsettling is how fragile this whole system is. One specific brain area fails, and suddenly a core part of reality disappears. This isn't some abstract philosophical problem. It's a literal collapse of how you experience time and space. You still see things, but you no longer see them happen. And it's not like the brain adapts easily. People with Akinetopsia don't typically regain normal motion vision. They develop workarounds. They memorize object positions. They track sound and shadow. But it never becomes natural again. The flow never comes back. And that makes you realize just how much of what you take for granted is a trick, a delicate illusion built on neural timing, electrical pulses, and invisible processing layers. Even outside of full Akinetopsia, you can catch glimpses of this breakdown in everyday life. Ever try to swat a fast, moving fly and your hand just lands in the wrong spot? Or see a fan spinning so fast it looks still? Or watch a strobe light freeze someone mid-dance? Those are tiny moments where your brain's motion perception glitches. It can't keep up, and the illusion slips. Akinetopsia is just that, all the time, permanent, unfiltered, unforgiving. And the really strange part, people with this condition still understand motion intellectually. They know a car is moving. They know water is flowing. But knowing is different from seeing. And when you lose that direct perception, The whole world becomes guesswork. It's not just about seeing movement. It's about predicting the next moment, timing your actions, feeling connected to the rhythm of the world. Akinetopsia severs that thread. It isolates you in a universe where things shift without warning, and every action feels like a gamble. So when you think about how stable your visual world feels, remember this, that stability is a performance. Your brain is editing a movie in real time. When it works, you never notice. But when it fails, you realize how much of your life is stitched together from thin air. Motion-induced blindness. There's something really unnerving about staring straight at something and then watching it vanish right before your eyes. Not because it faded out or moved or got blocked. It just disappears, even though you're still looking directly at it. That's motion-induced blindness, and it messes with your confidence in what you think you're seeing. This happens when a small, unmoving object is surrounded by a field of motion, like dots or patterns spinning around it. You could stare at the object dead center for several seconds, and suddenly it's gone. Then it pops back in. Then it vanishes again, back and forth. It doesn't blink or dissolve. Your brain just erases it, and you have no idea when or why it's going to happen. What's terrifying is that your eyes are working just fine during this. The object is still there. The light is hitting your retina. The signal is going to your brain, but your brain throws it out anyway. It decides that something is not important enough to keep in your awareness, so it deletes it from your conscious experience, like it never existed in the first place. This illusion was first studied seriously in the early 2000s, and researchers still don't fully agree on why it happens. But one of the leading theories is that your visual system is wired to prioritize movement. Your brain evolved to focus on things that change, things that might be threats or opportunities. So when there's too much motion around, the still object becomes background noise. It's filtered out. You stop seeing it, even though it's right in front of you. It's a really strange reversal of how you think attention should work. You'd assume that focusing hard on something would make it more visible, more stable. But in this case, attention doesn't save the object. It might even help it vanish faster. Your brain is overwhelmed by the moving context, and it starts simplifying the scene. It decides the still target is probably not important, so it drops it. And this isn't rare or subtle. You can try it yourself. There are simple demos online. 3 yellow dots in a triangle shape, surrounded by a swirling blue pattern. Keep your eyes fixed on the center and watch how one of the yellow dots disappears. It'll be gone for a few seconds, then come back. Sometimes 2 disappear, sometimes all 3. You don't feel your eyes moving. You don't feel anything change. But your perception flips without warning. This isn't just a cool optical trick. It raises serious questions about how much of the world your brain is actively hiding from you every second. You don't see the raw data coming in. You see a curated version, a story your brain builds, and that story can leave stuff out, sometimes on purpose, sometimes just because it thinks you don't need to know. There are even moments in real life when motion-induced blindness could be happening and you wouldn't know it. Picture a driver staring straight ahead at a busy intersection. A motorcyclist is waiting at a red light, not moving. Surrounding them are moving cars, pedestrians, flashing lights. The still motorcycle could literally disappear from the driver's awareness, even though it's in their field of view. Not because of distraction, because of the way perception works. It's one of the reasons certain road accidents seem to make no sense. People say they looked. They swear the person wasn't there. But the brain has a system that can silence stable visual input in the middle of chaos. The eyes are open. The signal is there. The awareness is not. The weird part is that your brain isn't broken when this happens. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. It's filtering. It's cleaning up your experience of the world so you can focus on what's likely to matter. But sometimes that filtering gets too aggressive. It throws out data you actually need. And the scariest part, you don't get a warning. You don't get an error message. You just stop seeing what's there. This illusion also shows how unstable visual awareness really is. We like to think we're conscious of everything in our view, but we're not. Awareness is selective. It's built from attention, memory, motion, expectation. Change one of those and reality shifts, not in your imagination. In your direct experience, you literally stop seeing. Some researchers have connected motion-induced blindness to broader cognitive phenomena, like inattentional blindness, the idea that we miss huge changes if we're focused on the wrong thing, or even change blindness, where objects swap or vanish in a scene, and we don't notice. But motion-induced blindness is different because you're not distracted. You're not looking away. You're staring straight at the thing that disappears. And it still vanishes. It's unsettling because it reminds you how little control you have over what you see. You can be alert, focused, and attentive, and your brain will still decide something doesn't belong in your conscious field. It makes you wonder how many times this has happened without you ever realizing. Not just with visual objects, but with people, with emotions, with moments that got filtered out because they didn't move enough. And all of this points to one brutal fact: perception is not reality. It's a controlled hallucination, updated just enough to keep you functional. And sometimes that system gets it wrong. Sometimes it deletes things that matter. Foreign accent syndrome. There's this strange, eerie moment where someone opens their mouth to speak, and what comes out is completely unexpected. Not in terms of what they're saying, but how they're saying it. Their voice has changed. Their accent, their rhythm, the melody of their words. All of it sounds like they're from somewhere else. Somewhere foreign. But they've never lived there. They've never studied the accent. And it happened overnight. That's foreign accent syndrome. And it's not a party trick. It's real. It's rare. And it absolutely wrecks people's sense of self. This isn't someone faking an accent or picking one up after traveling. It's usually triggered by a brain injury, a stroke, a traumatic impact, sometimes even a migraine. And after that injury, the person's speech pattern changes so dramatically that listeners swear they must be from another country. Someone who's lived in Texas their whole life might suddenly sound vaguely British or Eastern European. A native Japanese speaker might start sounding Korean or Chinese. The change is subtle, but consistent, and it's completely involuntary. What's fascinating is that the person isn't speaking a new language. They're still using their own words, their own grammar, their same vocabulary. It's the musicality of their speech that shifts. The cadence, the intonation, the way certain vowels are stretched or clipped. That's what flips. And it doesn't match any one accent exactly. It's more like a mimicry glitch. Something that sounds foreign to listeners, but doesn't fully belong anywhere. The mechanism behind it is both simple and deeply strange. Speech isn't just about language. It's also about motor control. Your brain orchestrates dozens of tiny muscle movements in your tongue, lips, throat, and jaw, all perfectly timed, all working together to produce the unique sound of your voice. When certain areas of the brain, especially the left hemisphere, which handles language and fine motor planning, get damaged, those movements get scrambled. But instead of just slurring or slowing down, the brain reconfigures speech in a way that accidentally imitates the rhythm of a foreign accent. That's where it gets psychologically brutal. People don't recognize their own voices anymore. They talk, and what comes out feels alien. They get asked constantly where they're from. Friends laugh or get confused. Some people stop speaking altogether out of shame or exhaustion. It's like your identity is stuck in your mouth, and suddenly someone else's voice moved in. There was a woman in Norway who had a stroke and woke up speaking with what sounded like a German accent. She had no ties to Germany, never visited, didn't speak the language. But now, every sentence she spoke carried this unfamiliar rhythm, and it made her feel like a stranger in her own country. People around her didn't understand what was happening. Some even accused her of faking it. That's the added weight of this condition. The social disbelief. The sense that your own voice has betrayed you, and no one believes you didn't choose it. It doesn't help that the syndrome is incredibly rare. Fewer than 100 documented cases worldwide, and the brain scans don't always offer clean explanations. Some people show damage in the speech motor areas, like Broca's area or the anterior insula. Others don't have clear lesions but still present with the symptoms. That uncertainty makes the experience even more surreal. You go to the doctor, and they tell you, technically, your language is fine. You can read, write, understand. But your voice, it's not yours anymore. What's even weirder is how consistent the illusion is. The brain doesn't randomly distort speech in all directions. It follows certain patterns. Listeners often agree on what kind of accent they hear, even when the speaker has never been exposed to that culture. That suggests the brain isn't just damaged. It's rerouting old speech pathways through new rhythms, accidentally copying foreign, sounding patterns in the process. It's like a musical remix made by a brain that forgot the original track. And this touches on something deeper. We don't just speak language. We live in it. Your accent tells people where you're from, what kind of education you've had, what region raised you, what emotional tone you carry. It's part of how others see you and how you hear yourself. When that changes, without your consent, without your control, it doesn't just feel like a speech disorder. It feels like an identity crisis. Foreign accent syndrome is a perfect reminder that your voice is not just a sound you make. It's a neurological performance, a whole body coordination act that depends on timing, memory, emotion, and social feedback. When even a small part of that performance breaks, the ripple effect is massive, and you're left in this uncanny middle zone where people hear you, but they don't hear you. Not the way you used to be. And there's no guaranteed fix. Some people recover naturally over months or years. Others never return to their original voice. Speech therapy can help retrain certain motor patterns, but the emotional toll is harder to treat. You're not just relearning how to talk. You're relearning how to be heard. This illusion isn't about vision, or motion, or memory. It's about something more intimate. The disconnect between who you feel you are and what the world hears when you speak. That's why it sticks with people. That's why it haunts them. Illusory truth effect. You probably think you're good at spotting nonsense, that you can tell truth from fiction just by using logic or common sense. But there's a glitch in your brain that makes it ridiculously easy to believe something is true just because you've heard it before. Not because it's logical, not because it's backed by facts, just because it sounds familiar. That's the illusory truth effect, and it's one of the sneakiest psychological tricks your brain plays on you. Here's how it works. Someone tells you a random statement. Say, carrots improve your night vision. You hear it once, and you don't really think about it. Then you hear it again a few weeks later, and then again from a friend. Each time, your brain gets a little more comfortable with it. Not because you've researched it or found solid proof, just because it keeps showing up. Eventually, it starts to feel true. You don't question it. You just nod and go, yeah, I've heard that before. Must be legit. But that example, totally false. The British military actually made it up during World War II to cover up radar technology. But that lie got repeated so often, it became sticky. And stickiness, it turns out, is often more powerful than truth. The brain is wired for efficiency. It doesn't want to analyze every new piece of information from scratch. That takes effort. So it uses shortcuts. And one of the biggest shortcuts is fluency. If something is easy to process, easy to read, easy to recall, easy to hear, it feels more true. And nothing boosts fluency more than repetition. That's what makes this so dangerous. Your brain can't tell the difference between true and familiar. It just knows that something feels smooth, easy, effortless, and then it tags that thing as reliable. You hear the same lie 5 or 6 times from different places, and suddenly it becomes part of your mental wallpaper. You stop questioning it because it doesn't feel new anymore. It feels known. This is why propaganda works. Why advertising works. Why conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. They don't need to make sense. They just need to be repeated. Loudly. Frequently. Across different channels. And the more people echo them, the more believable they become. Even to people who would never call themselves gullible. It's not just external lies that get in. The illusory truth effect also works on the stuff you tell yourself. You repeat a thought enough times. I'm not good at this. Nobody really cares. I'll never change. And your brain starts treating it as fact. Not because it's accurate, but because it's familiar. You've heard it before. And that alone gives it weight. In one classic study from the 1970s, researchers gave people a list of trivia statements. Some were true. Some were made up. Then they brought the participants back a few weeks later and mixed the original statements with new ones. The ones people remembered hearing before, even if they were completely false, were more likely to be judged as true. Just because they had been seen once. One single repetition was enough to boost belief. And it doesn't stop with time. A study published in 2015 found that even when people knew a statement was false, hearing it multiple times still made them more likely to rate it as true later. That means familiarity can override facts. It can override logic. It can even override your own memory. This illusion gets more powerful in noisy environments. Social media, for example, is the perfect amplifier for the illusory truth effect. You scroll past a headline 5 times in a week, even if you never click on it, and your brain starts giving it trust points. You see the same opinion in different posts, and your brain starts thinking, well, a lot of people are saying this. Must be something to it. It's like mental corrosion. Slowly, quietly, Falsehoods gain traction just by showing up. And if they rhyme, or are written in a bold font, or come with a smiling face or a viral video, they hit even harder. That's how your brain confuses fluency with accuracy. They feel the same, but they're not. What makes this even worse is that you don't notice it happening. You don't feel your belief system changing. There's no mental notification that says, "Hey, this thing you keep hearing is starting to feel true now." It's silent, it's gradual, and it becomes part of how you view the world. That's why it's so easy to manipulate public opinion. You don't have to convince everyone overnight. You just have to repeat something enough times that it slips past people's filters. Wrap it in confidence. Package it in something familiar, and it slides right in. This isn't about intelligence. Smart people fall for this all the time. In fact, smart people might be better at rationalizing the false things they believe because they're so good at arguing. And once a belief feels true, people will protect it, even when it started as nothing more than a catchy lie repeated one too many times. Understanding this illusion doesn't give you immunity, but it does give you awareness. And that awareness is the only thing that can slow the spread of mental shortcuts disguised as truth. The question is, what have you started to believe just because it got repeated enough? Visual snow syndrome. It's hard to explain what it feels like to look out at the world and constantly see static. Not just now and then, not just in the dark, all the time, across everything. Like your brain is playing a television channel that never quite comes into focus. That's what people with visual snow syndrome live with. A nonstop blizzard of tiny flickering dots, layered over reality, and the more you try to ignore it, the more it eats away at your sanity. The dots are usually described as white or black or transparent, like the visual noise you'd see on an old TV with no signal. But instead of being on a screen, it's layered across your entire vision. Walls, sky, people's faces. No matter what you look at, the snow is there. It doesn't go away when you blink. It doesn't fade with rest. It's not tied to anxiety or stress or lighting. It's just there, permanently. What makes this condition so disturbing is that most people with it are otherwise totally healthy. Their eyes are fine. Their brain scans come back normal. They're not hallucinating in the traditional sense. They're not imagining it. But what they see is fundamentally altered, and no one can tell them exactly why. For years, visual snow was brushed off as an aftereffect of migraines or dismissed as a side effect of medication. Some doctors still misdiagnose it as anxiety or hypochondria, but there's growing evidence that it's its own standalone neurological condition, not just something you see. Something your brain is doing all the time. The exact mechanism isn't fully understood, but the theory is this. The brain's visual processing center is overactive. It's not filtering out visual noise the way it should. Normally, your brain receives way more sensory data than it lets you consciously experience. It deletes most of the randomness. It smooths the image so you can focus on what matters. But in people with visual snow, that filtering system malfunctions. It stops editing, so all the visual junk that would normally get cleaned out, it stays. It pulses, it crawls across the visual field like static stuck to your eyes. And it's not just the snow. Most people with this condition also report other strange symptoms that come bundled in. After images that linger too long, light sensitivity so strong it feels like pain, starbursts or halos around lights, trails that follow moving objects. Some even describe a strange disconnection from what they're seeing, like the world is somehow less real, less solid. It's not a hallucination in the sense that your brain is inventing things out of nothing. It's more like a failure to tune the signal, a glitch in perception that turns the background noise of vision into the foreground. And once it locks in, it doesn't go away. One of the worst parts of visual snow syndrome is how invisible it is to everyone else. You try to describe it and people look at you like you're making it up, like you're being dramatic. But imagine waking up one day and discovering that every surface in your world now has a flickering overlay. Every conversation you have, every movie you watch, every moment of silence, all of it has this restless noise dancing across it. And no one else can see it. No one else can hear it in their mind. You're stuck in a glitch that no one believes is real. People have tried everything to fix it. Eye exams, brain scans, medications, supplements. Some get told it's anxiety. Others get passed from neurologist to psychiatrist to optometrist with no answers. A few people find relief through lifestyle changes, cutting out stimulants, reducing screens, managing migraines. But most don't. The snow just stays. And the worst part, it can hit anyone. Some people get it suddenly, after a flu or a minor concussion, or even out of nowhere. One day their vision is fine. The next it's full of flicker. Others say it came on gradually, so slowly they didn't realize it until it was too late. They thought everyone's vision looked like that. They thought it was normal, until they mentioned it and realized no one else had any idea what they were talking about. There are support groups now, online forums, videos that try to simulate the snow using digital effects, but none of them really capture it. Because it's not just visual, it's psychological. It wears people down, makes them question their sanity. They see doctors who don't believe them, family members who tell them to stop obsessing, friends who say they look fine, so they must be fine. But they're not fine, because every second of the day, their reality is glitched. Not imagined, not exaggerated, just altered, relentlessly. And it gets you thinking, how much of what we call normal vision is just the brain's best guess? How many illusions are quietly being filtered out to keep the world stable and clear? Visual snow syndrome might be the result of that filter breaking. The brain stops making the world look clean and smooth and perfect. And instead, you see the noise that was always there, the static under the surface. It's one of the few illusions that doesn't play with your beliefs or your expectations. It attacks your direct experience of seeing, and it reminds you just how fragile that experience really is. Stochastic resonance. There's something incredibly weird about the way your brain processes weak signals. You'd think noise would make everything harder to detect, right? That if you're trying to pick up a faint signal, the last thing you'd want is more randomness layered on top. But there's a bizarre twist in the way nature works. Sometimes, adding more noise actually helps. It boosts the signal instead of drowning it. That phenomenon is called stochastic resonance, and once you understand it, it changes how you think about sensitivity, awareness, and even decision-making. Here's the basic idea. You've got a signal that's too weak to detect on its own. It's just below the threshold, not strong enough to trigger a response. Now, if you add a little bit of random background noise, not too much, just enough, the combined energy can push that weak signal over the edge, making it noticeable. So the randomness doesn't blur the message, it reveals it. It amplifies it in this strange, counterintuitive way. chaos makes clarity possible. This isn't just a metaphor. It's been observed in real biological systems. Neurons in your brain, for example, sometimes rely on tiny electrical impulses that don't always fire unless something pushes them past a threshold. When weak stimuli are combined with just the right amount of background noise, those neurons suddenly become responsive. The randomness helps them fire. It literally makes your brain more sensitive. The first time this was seriously studied, it wasn't even in humans. It was in crickets. Scientists discovered that when they exposed crickets to a barely detectable sound and added some low, level white noise, the crickets reacted more consistently. And the more they looked into it, the more places they started seeing it. In mechanoreceptors, in visual systems, even in the cells that help fish detect vibration in water. Stochastic resonance shows up in systems that are designed to detect weak signals. And instead of filtering out noise, those systems sometimes depend on it. Now take that same logic and apply it to humans. There's research showing that people can detect very faint tactile sensations better when a tiny vibration is added to the skin. Same with balance. People with poor postural control, like the elderly or those with neurological damage, can actually balance better when exposed to a subtle level of mechanical noise. It sounds insane, but their systems become more stable when you introduce controlled chaos. Why would evolution build something so inefficient? It turns out it's not inefficient at all. Life isn't lived in sterile, signal-only environments. Nature is noisy. The brain was built inside a swirling storm of background signals. Electrical, sensory, emotional. So instead of trying to filter out all the noise, the brain learned to use it. Leverage it. Ride it like a wave. That's what stochastic resonance is. Noise, when tuned correctly, becomes a feature instead of a bug. You can even think about it psychologically. Ever had a hunch that only made sense once your mind was flooded with ideas, impressions, emotions, or distractions? That moment when the right thought popped out of the mess. That might be a kind of mental stochastic resonance. Your internal noise, memories, fragments, feelings, gives a barely, their insight just enough of a push to break through. You suddenly feel the answer, not because it got louder, but because the background chaos aligned in just the right way. This happens with perception too. Think about when you're trying to make out a voice in a noisy room. You strain to hear it, and then suddenly, not because the voice got louder, but because the pattern of noise shifted, you can suddenly make out the words. It's like the noise helped carve a shape around the signal. The randomness wasn't the enemy. It was the sculptor. It goes deeper. In some ways, your entire nervous system is tuned for this kind of sensitivity. You're not just built to react to strong, obvious signals. You're built to notice patterns in randomness, to detect when the noise itself contains a hint of structure. And that's where the magic of stochastic resonance lies. Right on that edge between order and disorder, clarity and chaos. But this also comes with risk. Too much noise, and the signal gets drowned. Too little noise, and the signal never breaks through. There's a sweet spot, a narrow zone where the signal and the randomness work together, not against each other. That's the real lesson here. It's not about removing uncertainty. It's about tuning into it, accepting that a little instability, a little unpredictability, can actually enhance your perception. It can wake your system up. And this isn't just sensory. It's emotional, too. Some of the most important realizations you've ever had probably came through a messy process. a mixture of confusion, background tension, small details, and timing. And then, suddenly, the pattern emerged. That's resonance. That's your brain using noise to find clarity. Stochastic resonance reminds you that the world isn't always best understood through clean lines and clear inputs. Sometimes, the very thing that looks like interference is what makes understanding possible. Sometimes, it's the static that brings the signal into focus. Pareidolia, you've done this. Everyone has. You look up at a cloud and see a dog. You glance at a plug socket and think it looks like a shocked little face. You swear the burn marks on your toast look like a famous celebrity. That moment when your brain finds something meaningful in something completely meaningless. That's pareidolia. And once you realize how often it happens, it makes you question how much of what you see is real and how much your brain is just desperately trying to make sense of chaos. Pareidolia is your mind playing a kind of visual shortcut. It takes random patterns, shadows, textures, noise, and forces them into familiar shapes. Faces are the most common, but it can be animals, words, objects, anything. You see a pattern, and your brain rushes to fill in the blanks. It's not a malfunction. It's not a bug. It's your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Recognize threats, friends, food, and shelter as fast as possible, even if it means getting it wrong sometimes. There's a part of your brain called the fusiform face area. It lights up specifically when you see a face. Not when you think about a face. Not when you imagine one. Only when you visually detect one. And that system is hypersensitive. It would rather give you a false positive than miss something important. So it fires even when there is no actual face there. Just a pair of dots and a line in the right place, and boom. Your brain goes, yep, that's a face. No time to analyze. Just instant recognition. This sensitivity served us well in evolution. Imagine being out in the wild and having to spot a predator hiding in bushes. Your survival depended on your ability to pick out just the hint of a face or a shape that looked like danger. Better to see a face that isn't there than miss the one that is. That wiring stuck with us. Which is why today you see grumpy expressions in car headlights or cartoon smiles in tree bark. But it's not just faces. Pareidolia happens in sound too. Ever listened to a noisy radio or a fan humming and thought you heard someone whispering your name? That's auditory pareidolia. Your brain is scanning for voices, especially familiar ones. So it pulls order out of randomness. Sometimes people hear full words or music in pure static. Not because it's there, but because the mind is constantly trying to organize the mess into something it understands. And once your brain thinks it's found a pattern, it's hard to unsee it. There's this stickiness to pareidolia. You show someone a rock that kind of looks like a lizard, and that's all they can see from then on. You can explain the geology, the erosion, the cracks. None of that matters. The image has latched on. That is how powerful this illusion is. It hijacks your attention and refuses to let go. It gets even weirder when people start interpreting these patterns as signs or messages. Religious icons appearing in food, faces in water stains, messages from the universe encoded in tree knots or moldy walls. And here's the thing. Those people are not crazy. They're just experiencing the natural human drive to find meaning. Their brains see something that feels familiar, and then emotion floods in to fill the gap. Wonder, awe, fear, all based on a coincidence of shape. Even artists and designers use this tendency on purpose. Camouflage, logos, mascots, optical illusions. They all exploit pareidolia. They play with the edge between chaos and order. They know your brain wants to find something recognizable, so they hide faces in logos or sneak animals into architecture. And your mind loves it. You get a little dopamine hit every time you solve the puzzle. Every time your brain goes, hey, I see it. The wild part is that pareidolia is so deep in your brain that even infants show signs of it. Studies have shown that babies prefer images with face-like arrangements, 2 dots over a line, over random patterns. They lock onto that configuration. It calms them. It's wired into us from the very start. Before language, before reasoning, before logic, pattern recognition is primal. But here's where it gets unsettling. If your brain can conjure faces from clouds and whispers from noise, what else is it projecting onto the world? How many of your experiences, your fears, your beliefs, your memories, are just patterns your mind invented to make things feel less random? How often are you seeing what's actually there versus what you expect to see? Pareidolia is not just a cute brain quirk. It's a reminder that perception is not reality. It's a guess your brain makes in real time, based on experience, survival needs, and built-in shortcuts. And it doesn't care about being accurate. It cares about being fast. So the next time you see a creepy face in your bathroom tile or hear your name in the rustle of leaves, remember, your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, creating order, even when none exists.